You think you know Egypt, sand, pyramids, mummies, tourist guides with bad jokes. But what if the desert's silence is not empty, but hides something? Not only tombs and treasures, but questions that become harder to answer the more you think about them. Why build monuments toward the sky without tools? Why dig tunnels that lead nowhere? Why does a 4,500-year-old riddle still surpass your best algorithm? Welcome to Egypt, the land of gods, geometry, and irresolvable paradoxes, where the dead do not rest in peace, and the living do not agree on what they left behind. Let's start investigating the problem of the pyramids. How to build the impossible. It is not about what they built, but how the hell they did it with copper chisels, papyrus ropes, and levers. The Great Pyramid of Giza is not just an ancient wonder. It is a mathematical problem carved into the desert. A monument of 23 million blocks and 6 million tons that pays homage to divine geometry, or an engineering feat so aggressive that it continues to mock us 4,500 years later. And it was built without drones, diesel, or plans. Only sand, sweat, and something we have not yet discovered. But this is what we are told to believe. A group of men dressed in linen skirts dragged limestone blocks up ramps for decades in perfectly straight lines using tools we have not even found. Sure, let's do the math. Each of those limestone blocks weighs about 25 tons. To finish the pyramid in 20 years, according to the accepted theory, workers would have had to extract, move, shape, and place a block every 2 minutes, day and night. Without breaks, delays, or crushing their feet, only with relentless robotic efficiency, without modern tools, and without wheels. And there is still more. The base of the Great Pyramid is leveled almost perfectly, with an accuracy of less than an inch in 13 acres of sand, without satellite guidance. Today, a laser leveling team would be needed to achieve it. They perhaps use some rope. The alignment of the pyramid with true north is even more accurate than that of the Greenwich Observatory. Think about it. Your ancestors built in the sand with better orientation skills than your phone. And what do the ancient texts say about how they did it? Nothing. Not a single hieroglyph. Not a single dusty instruction manual. Only silence, as if they did not think it worth mentioning. Or perhaps as if they did not want anyone to know. This is how it happens. You enter the desert hoping to feel awe. You leave with a headache. Not because the scale is overwhelming, although it is, but because the logistics refuse to add up. Theories multiply like conspiracy theories. There is the straight ramp theory. Simple, right? Build a huge straight dirt ramp on the side of the pyramid. But that would require more material than the pyramid itself. And what happens when you want to place the top stones? Do you keep climbing toward the sky? Then there is the zigzag ramp theory. Nice, except that it would have blocked the sides and made it impossible to adjust the placement of the stones. The spiral ramp around the interior. Interesting until you realize that we have not found any trace of it. There are no ramps, nor scaffolds, nor abandoned tools. Only the stones placed there, mocking modern hubris. And then there is the most irritating theory of all. Maybe we are simply not smart enough to understand how it was done. That is the one that really bothers rationalists because it seems true. Scientists have tried to explain it. They brought structural engineers, stonemasons, archaeologists, even NASA scientists. The results were disparate at best. Mark Lehner, Egyptologist and defender of the pyramids, insists that there is no mystery, only a well-organized workforce and brilliant planning. He even helped to carry out an experiment. A small team built a pyramid on a reduced scale using sleds, ropes, and modern cranes. There's a small problem. The real pyramid is 60 times larger. Oh, and they use cranes, so it's not quite the same. Some engineers suggested that water could have been used for reducing friction when dragging blocks. Others proposed that a lost arm of the Nile helped bring stones closer. Both hypotheses are useful, but neither explains the location. The precision, the clean 51 degrees inclination maintained on all 4 sides, with deviations measured in fractions of a degree. What we are left with is a graveyard of half solutions and a giant pile of stones laughing at you. They still can't explain it because either we lack a technology they had, or they lack something we have, ego. Modern builders boast, The ancient Egyptians buried their secrets. You don't see manuals or scribes explaining any process. You don't even see mistakes. There are no trial-and-error prototypes. There are no beta pyramids. They just did it right. The first time without failures. As if it was never about showing off. That's the part that worries people. Because if you found a perfect pyramid on another planet, you would think it the work of an alien intelligence. But we found one here, and what do we think? Slave labor and sun. Perhaps the pyramid was not built to be understood. Maybe that was the goal. An anti-monument. A riddle carved in stone, mocking the arrogance of all future civilizations. And then, just when you think it can't get any stranger, scientists find a hidden void inside the structure. 2017. The tomography of Millionaire reveals a space the size of an airplane, completely sealed above the Great Gallery. There is no way to enter. There is no idea what is inside. There is no clue as to why it is there. A sealed chamber in the most studied building in history. You tell me what kind of civilization hides empty rooms in a 6 million-ton stone puzzle. It doesn't tell anyone. Which brings us to the next question. If the pyramid is an enigma, what about the parts we haven't found yet? Because under that same desert, they have begun to find entire cities that they did not know existed. And under the Great Pyramid, they found something else. Something buried. The chamber that shouldn't exist. They were looking for bones. What they found was a void. Not figuratively, nor a poetic void like the one you feel when looking at your bank account. A real and measurable physical absence. A hole in the foundations of the Great Pyramid. One that should not be there. One that nobody can explain. This is how it happened. In 2023, a team of archaeologists armed with ground-penetrating radar was inspecting the western cemetery next to the Great Pyramid. It was a routine, quiet task, sand, bones, digital mapping. Nothing exciting until the radar detected something strange. It was not on the ground, nor on the walls, but under the base. Just below the northeast corner of the Great Pyramid, one of the most studied structures on Earth, there seemed to be a chamber about 27 meters wide, buried, sealed, and intact. There was no tunnel leading to it. There was no historical record. It was not known why it was there. The team did what any reasonable person would do. They published their findings, speculated a little, and then watched as the authorities quickly silenced the debate. Why? Because in Egypt, excavating near the Great Pyramid is like trying to excavate under the Vatican. It is not just archaeology, it is theology, it is national identity, it is conspiracy, it is gasoline. This is how it works. You dig in the desert, and the desert returns the excavation to you. The Great Pyramid has always had secrets. The original builders left no plans, no architectural blueprints, not even graffiti, except for a few scrolls with the names of the work team in the deepest part of the structure, such as Friends of Khufu or Drunks of Menor. Yes, seriously. Everything else has been conjecture. And for centuries, explorers and treasure hunters tried to open it as if it were a giant stone piñata. Some dynamited it. Others simply got lost. It is said that Napoleon spent a night alone inside and came out pale and shocked, refusing to talk about what he had seen. Which brings us back to this new chamber. Why was it not discovered before? Simple. The technology was not sensitive enough. Ground-penetrating radar is relatively new to archaeology. Until recently, we did not know how to look under the limestone foundations. Now that we can, we are finding things we should not. But what is it? Nobody knows. Excavation is not allowed. The official explanation is cautious. It is a possible architectural anomaly. Translation: we do not know what it is, and we will not touch it. But if it is a chamber and it is deliberate, then we have a serious problem. Because the base of the pyramid is supposed to have been finished first, which means that this chamber had to be built before the rest of the structure, which means that it is older than the pyramid, which means that we do not know what we are seeing. Scientists have tried to explain it. Some theorize that it could be a symbolic tomb, a kind of spiritual place. Others speculated that it could have been a storage space. One even raised the idea that it could be a natural, eroded cavern, despite its perfectly geometric dimensions. None of the theories caught on. Why? Because nothing else in the pyramid is accidental. Each block, each angle, Each chamber is aligned with obsessive precision to the stars, the seasons, and the Nile. The idea that a chamber exists randomly under the structure is like finding a secret basement in your house that you never built yourself. It doesn't happen. Not in Egypt. Not here. So why don't they open it? 2 words: historical politics. Excavating a chamber under the Great Pyramid would unleash a storm not only among conservationists, but also among religious groups, governmental organizations, conspiracy theorists, and even rival archaeologists. Because if they open it and find nothing, the myth would deflate. But if they open it and find something, well, that would change history. And there's another theory, the one that is whispered in internet forums and in old dusty magazines. The one that archaeologists do not dare say aloud, but that they cannot completely rule out. What if the chamber does not belong to the Pyramid of Khufu? What if it predates it? What if the builders of Khufu found it and built the pyramid on top of it? Now we're in deep waters because that suggests a lost civilization or a different origin or knowledge that we cannot explain. And here is the most surprising thing. Similar gaps have been found in other pyramids. Hidden corridors, sealed wells, places where no human being has entered in thousands of years, if they ever did. All sealed, all silent. It is as if the ancients not only built tombs, they were hiding things. They still cannot explain it because they do not agree on what they are seeing. Is it a trap, a vault, a ritual space? Or is it a message? Some scholars believe that ancient Egypt codified spiritual knowledge in architecture and that the pyramids were cosmological models, stone maps of the afterlife. If that is true, then this chamber might not be for the living. It could be a door. But here is the irony. Even if the government approved an excavation, even if the best archaeologists in the world obtained authorization, they could not open it without running the risk of it collapsing. The pyramid is so perfectly balanced that drilling a single hole could destabilize sections of the foundations. So the chamber remains closed, unopened, intact, waiting. Perhaps that is how it should be. Perhaps some doors are not meant to be opened. Perhaps what is down there does not want to be found. And while you are up there, with the sun warming the stone under your feet, you cannot help but wonder if they built secret chambers under the pyramid. What do they bury next to it? The Great Void, the most perfect empty room in Egypt. Some rooms hide secrets. Some of the secret. This does not appear on any map, nor on plans, nor in ancient texts. No one alive has ever entered it. It has no doors, no corridors, no known purpose. But it is there, inside the Great Pyramid, as real as the stones that surround it, as unknown as the gods who were supposed to live there. They call it the Great Void, and that name is the closest to honesty that we have had in this whole mess. Discovered in 2017 by the Scan Pyramids Project, a group of international physicists and engineers using muon tomography. Imagine cosmic X-rays for dead, giant triangles. The void was found floating above the Great Gallery, a steep central corridor leading upwards through the pyramid's core. It is not a corridor. It is not a tunnel. It is an enormous empty space, larger than any room inside the pyramid. Approximately 30 meters long, the size of a commercial airplane, suspended in stone like a coffin in a concrete tomb, and sealed on all sides. This is how it happened. The scientists did not set out to look for a mystery. They were testing new imaging technology. What they found was so unexpected that they assumed it was an error, something misaligned, a false positive. But the data came back again and again. Cosmic particles do not lie. They cross the air, not stone. And there was a piece of the pyramid that acted as if it did not exist. The void. The official response from the Egyptian authorities in charge of antiquities. A shrug. Perhaps it is structural. Perhaps it is decorative. Perhaps it is nothing. Except that this is not a civilization known for wasting space. The ancient Egyptians did not leave gaps because every centimeter of the pyramid was deliberate. The alignment with the belt of Orion, the golden ratio in its dimensions, its astronomical precision. There were people who built in stone what others could not encode. There are no accidents in the king's house of eternity. And yet there it is, a hole in the most solid structure on Earth, a room that no one can reach, an enigma without a question. The scientists tried to explain it. The theories began to accumulate like sand in a well. Was it a pressure relief chamber? A forgotten construction space? An ancient builder's break room? But none of this made sense. The void is not located as a structural feature. It is above the Great Gallery, not directly above the King's Chamber, where it would be logical for pressure to disperse. It has no corridor or staircase. It is too clean, too empty. Some speculated that it could be a symbolic chamber, a space created for the pharaoh's soul to ascend in line with the stars, a spiritual launch platform. Spiritual launch platform. Others suggested something darker, a hidden crypt to protect it from tomb robbers. An Egyptologist even proposed that it could contain the true burial of Khufu. But the king's chamber that we know is a decoy. But here's the problem. There is no way to enter. At least, none that we have found. There is no tunnel connecting to it. Not a gap, just air sealed in stone for 4,500 years. Completely inaccessible. To open it, it would be necessary to drill or blow it up, which is not an option. The structural integrity of the pyramid is so delicate that even tiny vibrations are monitored. A false move would cause a collapse. So, for now, the void remains intact, a secret immune to science. And what if, and we say it with dramatic solemnity, it was on purpose? They still cannot explain it because it does not make sense from an architectural, functional, or religious point of view, unless you accept that perhaps it is not destined to be understood. Think about it. You build a pyramid the size of a mountain. You align it with celestial objects with mathematical perfection. You design it to withstand millennia. And then, right in the center, you hide a huge chamber and ensure that no one can reach it. Not even you. Why? It is not a room. It is a statement, a message, perhaps even a threat. The philosopher's version is this. The void exists to remind you that knowledge has limits. That mystery is not a system error. It is a characteristic. The ancients were not primitive. They were precise. And if they left a mystery in the stone, it is because they wanted it to remain mysterious. But the darkest version is worse. What if it was not the Egyptians who built the void? What if they found it and built the pyramid around it? A sacred space, an alien vault, a cosmic point? We do not know. We cannot know it. And that drives people crazy. You see, modern science has a terrible weakness. It hates not knowing. It cannot leave a blank space on a map. Everything unknown must become known. And here, in the middle of one of the most studied monuments in history, is a gigantic empty middle finger that mocks that instinct. The void laughs in your face, and your tools cannot touch it. Your theories bounce off it. Your curiosity feeds it. In short, it is the perfect mystery, and it leads to an even bigger question, perhaps the most important of all. If the inside of the pyramid has secret chambers, what about the people inside? The missing queen, the disappearance of Nefertiti. Her name means the beautiful one has arrived, and then, suddenly, she left. Without wars, scandals, a death mask, or a tomb, just a disappearance. For more than a decade, Queen Nefertiti ruled alongside Pharaoh Akhenaten during one of the strangest periods in the history of Egypt, an era of solar gods, closed temples, and radical monotheism. She was not just a decorative consort. She was powerful, political, possibly a co-regent, perhaps even pharaoh under the alias of Nefernuiten. And then, around 1336 BCE, see nothing. There are no official records of her death, no proper burial, no sanctuary, just a black hole in the parchment of time where her legacy should be. This is how it happened. In a civilization obsessed with the afterlife, where every noble had a tomb, every cat a sarcophagus, and even organs were embalmed and labeled, the idea that one of its most iconic queens could simply vanish is quite strange. It is offensive. You are expected to believe that this queen, the face of an entire religious revolution, the woman whose bust is literally the Mona Lisa of the ancient world, simply vanished like a sand statue. Let's go back. During the Amarna period, Akhenaten and Nefertiti did something that was essentially an ancient heresy. They forbade the worship of the traditional gods of Egypt and declared the solar disk Aten as the only true deity. Polytheism left the priests jobless. The entire theological infrastructure of Egypt, which had endured for centuries, was fodder for the flames in favor of a minimalist sun cult. And Nefertiti did not stand idly by. She appears in more sculptures than Akhenaten himself. She is shown defeating her enemies, wearing pharaonic attire, and even leading religious rituals. She was not just a queen. She was a 𝐦𝐤. Then Akhenaten dies, and the story goes silent. The court tries to pretend that none of it happened. The following pharaohs erased the legacy of Amarna. The temples are buried. The names are chiseled from the walls. It's as if ancient Egypt had done a factory reset. But what happened to Nefertiti? This is where things get surreal. Some scholars argue that she died young and was buried in Amarna, a city now in ruins. But there is no body, no marked tomb, nothing definitive. Others argue that she changed her name, became pharaoh, and ruled. Disguised. That's where the name of Nefertiti comes in, a mysterious figure who ruled briefly after Akhenaten, before the rise of the boy king Tutankhamun. Many believe that it was Nefertiti turned into Elizabeth Holmes. All the titles, no fingerprints. Then there is the theory of Nicholas Reeves. And this is where things get crazy. In 2015, Reeves examined high-resolution scans of Tutankhamun's tomb. He noticed faint lines under the painted walls, not cracks, contours, architectural ghosts. They looked suspiciously like doors that had been plastered and painted to match the rest of the chamber. He proposed something far-fetched. Nefertiti's tomb is right behind Tutankhamun's. That the modest burial place of the boy king was actually just a facade. That behind one of the walls hides a sealed chamber, and inside it, Nefertiti. This theory was on the front page of every newspaper. It unleashed a great controversy. The former head of antiquities of Egypt, 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐤, dismissed it outright. There is no tomb, he said, there is no queen, but he could not refute it. The scanners were real. The lines were there, and yet no one opened the wall. The Egyptian government briefly authorized radar scans, then retracted, then approved more scans, and then declared that there was nothing behind the wall, but never published conclusive data. Everything turned into an archaeological soap opera. Scientists tried to explain it. Every year, another expedition proposes another explanation. Perhaps she was secretly buried. Perhaps her tomb was looted then. Perhaps she died in disgrace. Perhaps her body is in sight, but mislabeled, like erroneously filing an old version of a queen in Miscellaneous. In 2003, a team claimed to have found her mummy in the Valley of the Kings, an unidentified woman known as the Young Lady. DNA tests later confirmed that this mummy was Tutankhamun's mother, and we know that Nefertiti was his stepmother. So that theory collapsed. On another occasion, it was suggested that a body labeled KV35YL was her, but could not be identified with certainty either. Even her famous bust in Berlin is part of the mystery. It is almost perfect, symmetrical, intact, but strangely unfinished. It is missing an eye. It is not damaged. It was never painted, as if the artist had stopped halfway because he knew something was wrong. They still cannot explain it because there are too many clues that lead to dead ends. Each possibility creates a contradiction. If she was buried in Amarna, where is the tomb? If she ruled after Akhenaten, why was her name erased? If she was buried in Tutankhamun's tomb, why not open the wall? There is no smoking sarcophagus, just blurred outlines, contradictory DNA, and ancient politics. But perhaps that is the key. Perhaps Nefertiti did not disappear. Perhaps she erased herself. After all, she survived a religious coup. Her name would have been first on the list during the crackdown. What better way to survive spiritually or literally than becoming a ghost? No tomb, no glory, just silence. Not forgotten, but hidden. And perhaps that is why the wall has not been torn down. Not because they are afraid of being wrong, but because they are afraid of being right. Because if Nefertiti is really behind that wall, then all the textbooks must be rewritten. All theories crumble. The line of pharaohs changes. The history of monotheism must be told from a different throne, one carved by a woman who disappeared so completely she may have become the ultimate myth. And that leads us to one last question. If her body is still lost, What else have we buried in plain sight? The Thule Papyrus, fire in the sky. In 1480 A.C., in 1480 B.C., something appeared in the skies of Egypt. It was not the sun. It was not a star. It was not a god, at least not one officially included in the state religion. It was round. It was burning. And it was flying. It hovered over the pharaoh's army, shone brighter than anything they had ever seen, and, according to the text, multiplied. Waves of flying circles flooded the Egyptian sky, causing panic among the animals, leading the priests to prayer, and leaving the entire army in stunned silence. Then, as suddenly as they had arrived, they left. And all that remains is a single sheet of papyrus, or rather a transcription of it known as the Thule Papyrus. And it is either a crude forgery, a historical curiosity, or the first documented UFO sighting in the history of mankind. This is what happened. In the 1930s, an Egyptian papyrus was discovered in an antique store in Cairo by Alberto Thule, director of the Egyptian section of the Vatican Museum. He did not buy the papyrus directly. He was not allowed to, but he supposedly made a copy. Years later, a transcription of this copy appeared, translated by a certain Boris Dracowiltz, a controversial and slightly mystical Egyptologist. The translated text seems to be taken from a science fiction script of the 50s, accidentally left in a tomb. In the year 22, a great disk of fire appeared in the sky, coming from the south. He had no head. The breath from his mouth emitted a fetid odor. His body was 1 rod long and 1 wide. He had no voice. And later, after some days, behold, they became more numerous in the sky than ever. They shone in the sky more than the glow of the sun, and extended to the limits of the 4 supports of the skies. And finally, it was after dinner when these circles of fire ascended higher in the sky, moving towards the south. Fish and birds fell from the sky. We are not saying that they were ancient aliens, but we are also not saying that they were not. Scientists tried to explain it, and depending on who you ask, you get a different version of nothing. The majority position among Egyptologists is that the Thule Papyrus is a hoax. Why? Well, to begin, the original has disappeared. No one has seen the papyrus, only the supposed transcription in modern hieratic writing, which looks suspiciously orderly. There are no records in museums, no photos, no notes from Thule confirming the finding beyond anecdotal letters. When researchers requested verification from a Vatican museum, they were told the papyrus was not in the collection. It simply does not exist. Not anymore. Case closed. Not quite. Because the language of the translation, although clumsy, follows the format of military records from the new empire. And the descriptions, as strange as they are, coincide with reports of atmospheric phenomena, great height, brightness, silence, sudden movements, panic, and animals. Skeptics suggest it could have been a meteor storm or ball lightning. But here's the problem. The scribes of ancient Egypt were not stupid. They knew how to distinguish between natural phenomena and omens. They cataloged the stars, eclipses, and comets with clinical precision. They had names for everything. But they had no name for this. They simply called it Circle of Fire. And let's not forget that this sighting took place during the reign of Thutmose III, a military pharaoh known for keeping incredibly detailed annals, the kind of person who counted his arrows. If this event was included in his official records, it was not taken lightly. So maybe it was natural, maybe it was supernatural, maybe it was extra-natural. But if it was a hoax, why fake it? There is no treasure map, no apocalyptic prophecy, no secret knowledge. It's just a strange, small report about the sky. Unless, of course, it was part of something bigger, something buried, something the scribes saw and could not stop seeing. They still cannot explain it because they do not agree on what it is. Without the original document, there is nothing to carbon date, nothing to analyze, just the ghost of a text, like a whisper in the wind that may or may not have existed. So it lives in historical limbo, too strange to be real, too ignored, which makes it the perfect seed for conspiracy. The usual suspects arrive on the scene. The ancient astronaut theorists say the Thule Papyrus is irrefutable proof that Egypt had extraterrestrial contact. that Thutmose III received a visit, that the gods of Egypt were never a metaphor. They were technology. And maybe that's why the document disappeared, hidden, buried, discredited. Because you can dismiss extraterrestrials all day until you read a real document from 3,000 years ago. It sounds like a scene from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Maybe the scribes wrote it because they didn't want it forgotten. Maybe we keep trying to forget it because we don't want it real. Or maybe it never happened. And the Thule Papyrus is just that. A falsification, a fantasy, a footnote. But if you have ever stood in the middle of the desert at night and looked at the same stars that those scribes saw, you will understand why they wrote it and why it still haunts us. Because if fire once fell from the sky, what else was watching? The missing map. Where was Punt? It was a land of incense and ivory, of gold, black wood, baboons, and precious mare trees. The Queen of Egypt ordered them planted in the courtyards of the temples. They called it Punt, or Punt if you felt theatrical. They called it Tanator, the land of gods. And then they lost it. Let's reflect on this. Ancient Egypt, one of the most organized and obsessive civilizations with records of history, a culture that kept receipts for grain, chopsticks, or rings, somehow lost an entire country. Nobody knows where Punt was. There are no ruins, no capital, no coast, just murals, cargo manifests, and myths. This is what is believed to have happened. The Egyptians loved Punt, not only for its trade, though they imported everything except live unicorns, but for what it represented. A mystical point of origin, a place of sacred abundance, a kind of sacred Costco full of jungle creatures and divine plants. Expeditions were sent from the 25th century BCE. The most famous was the one led by Queen Hatshepsut during the 18th dynasty. She carved the entire journey on the walls of her funerary temple in Deir el-Bahri, as if it were a real travel blog. You can still see it. Egyptian ships, elegant and ceremonial, sailing into the unknown. Piles of exotic products piled like offerings. A corpulent, barefoot, and majestic Punt Queen standing under the cheerful. It's the closest thing we have to a snapshot of the place. But the background is completely blank, without geographical references or coordinates, without a map indicating where it is. It is only taken for granted that the reader already knows where Punt is, which, frankly, is a discourtesy. Scientists have tried to explain it. Theories piled up like cargo on a Nile barge. Some said that Punt was in present-day Eritrea or Somalia, which makes sense according to the type of goods imported. Incense and myrrh come from there, as do the strange African animals that appear in temple art. Others placed it in southern Arabia, arguing that the Red Sea was Egypt's trade highway and that the descriptions of the coastal cities better fit Yemen. A more recent theory suggests that Punt was not a single place, but a network of shopping centers spread across the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, like a decentralized divine Amazon warehouse. That would explain why we can't find its capital. There was none. Only ports, barter areas, and temporary markets with a sacred appearance. But this is where things get murky. Despite all the mentions of Punt, dozens of them over the centuries, there is no physical evidence that there was an Egyptian settlement there. There are no temples, no outposts, no record from the Punt side. It is a one-way story. The Egyptians wrote about Punt. Punt did not respond. There is no language, no writing, no archives, just silence. It's like trading with Atlantis, which makes some scholars nervous because that silence begins to look suspiciously like a myth, a sacred metaphor, a cartographic placeholder for spiritual longing. What if Punt wasn't real? What if it was a ritual name, a grab bag for the origin of the sacred, a branding exercise, God's supply chain? They still can't explain it because none of the puzzle pieces perfectly fit. If Punt was Somalia, why is there no linguistic crossing? If it was Yemen, how do they transport giraffes across the desert? If it was a network, where are the archaeological chromes? The trail is old, but desperately cold. And let's not ignore the other possibility, one that Egyptologists discreetly avoid. What if Punt moved? What if it wasn't a place on the map, but a people, a migratory culture? A sacred merchant class that traveled with the wind and stars, appearing in Egyptian ports like gods with baskets of gifts, and then disappearing into legend. Perhaps Punt should never have been found. Perhaps it was sacred because it was always out of reach. Think about it. You are an ancient Egyptian. You believe that the gods walk among you. You believe that the Nile is divine. You believe that the afterlife is a real place. So when a strange ship arrives full of perfumes, panthers, and priests who speak in riddles, you don't ask for their passport. You call a punt. You write it in gold. And when it stops arriving, you assume that the gods have withdrawn. But here is what's really surprising. Some archaeologists now believe that the Egyptians might have faked some of it, that the expedition to Punt was propaganda, that the carvings of the Hatshepsut temple were partly a publicity stunt and partly a divine brand. There are subtle inconsistencies in the duplicated art, strangely generic buildings, gods inserted a posteriori. If that is true, then perhaps Punt was always more dream than destination, a story written in spices, a myth that can be navigated but never reached. And perhaps that is why it continues to obsess historians. Because we lost more than a trade route. We lost a piece of Egypt's soul. And if Punt can disappear, what else did they lose or erase that we won't even know existed? The hieroglyph that should not exist in Abydos. You don't expect to see a helicopter in a 3,000-year-old temple. And yet there it is, carved into a sandstone beam in the Temple of Seti, the first in Abydos. One of the oldest and most sacred sites in Egypt houses hieroglyphs that bear an astonishing resemblance to modern machines. A helicopter, a tank, a fighter plane, even what some swear is a flying saucer, perfectly proportioned in plain sight of everyone. In a temple built around 1290 BCC. Welcome to one of the most controversial and memed mysteries of Egyptology. The helicopter hieroglyphs of Abydos, where time seems to fold like bad origami. This is what happens. The Temple of Seti is a masterpiece. Long corridors, dimly lit chapels, reliefs so intricate they seem to come to life. Built during the New Kingdom, it was intended to honor Osiris, god of the dead, and to affirm the divine legacy of the pharaoh. But it is also a place where dynasties superimpose their stories. Seti I, Ramses II, one of the longest-lived pharaohs of Egypt, continued construction after the death of his father, which meant carving over older inscriptions. And that's where things get weird. In a beam of the ceiling of a back room, well above eye level, the superimposed hieroglyphs created accidental forms if one squinted, if one looked with modern eyes, or if one was in the mood for a sweet temporary paranoia. The first images appeared in small archaeological circles in the 1990s. Then the internet got involved quickly. Suddenly, the Abydos helicopter was everywhere. Conspiracy theorists pointed to it as proof that ancient Egyptians had advanced technology. They'd been visited by time travelers, aliens, or ancient humans with forgotten technologies. The walls spoke, and apparently, they did so in code. Scientists tried to explain it and mostly succeeded, admittedly. The academic term for what happened is palimpsest, a rewriting or trimming of hieroglyphs in which older inscriptions were filled and new ones carved in the same place. Over time, the plaster filling the old glyphs eroded, causing both sets of inscriptions to be seen at once. It's like writing cat with a pen, covering it with correction fluid, writing dog on top with a pencil, and waiting 0 years for erosion to turn everything into a visual Rorschach test for the internet. According to experts, what looks like a helicopter is actually a jumble of overlapping characters. One reading says he who repels the 9 reverences, a poetic name for Egypt's enemies. The other invokes the name of Ramses II. So, case closed, right? Well, not quite. They still can't explain it because, even with the palimpsest theory, the images are too accurate. The helicopter has a distinctive tail rotor and a shape similar to an airplane's cockpit. The submarine or spacecraft has an eerily aerodynamic look. Even if we accept that this is coincidence, a question arises. Why do our modern machines look like ancient visual accidents now? Therein lies the heart of the matter. That's where the brain starts to itch, because coincidences are comforting until they add up. Sure, The carvings were not intended to represent technology, but what if something older inspired both? A visual archetype, a memory, a form transmitted through myths, rituals, or hallucinations. Or perhaps the Egyptians saw something in the sky and tried to draw it with the tools they had, which would turn the Abydos glyphs not into art, but into testimonies. And while scholars roll their eyes, other anomalies in Egyptian art remain persistent. The dendera lamp, which resembles a giant light bulb connected to a cable. The precision with which the obelisks were carved. The alleged batteries found in Baghdad, which resemble, but not quite. And, of course, the Tully papyrus, which we have already seen, which illuminated the skies with circles of fire. What is more likely? That we continue to imagine futuristic forms in ancient art, or that ancient art recorded something real and we are too committed to our own timelines to believe it. The Abydos helicopter, whether intentional or accidental, becomes a mirror. It reflects what we want it to reflect now. Some see coincidence, others see prophecy, the rest just see marketing potential. But no one denies one thing. It shouldn't look the way it does now. And that is the true mystery. Not the form itself, but the meaning we give to it. The refusal to believe that our ancestors could know things that we have not yet rediscovered. The panic that invades us when a civilization built in stone seems to wink at our most advanced machines. Because what if it's not just coincidence? What if ancient Egypt didn't just worship gods? What if it recorded its visitors then? The Saqqara box is built for giants. Imagine a corridor deep in the earth. Stone walls, no windows, a silence so dense you can hear a hum. Now, picture 24 giant stone boxes in that corridor, each carved from a single block of black granite, each weighing over 70 tons and with lids that weigh another 30. Each cut with such mechanical precision that you could cut yourself on the corners. This is the Serapeum of Saqqara, and it makes no sense. Officially, it is a funerary complex for the sacred Apis bulls, animals worshipped as physical incarnations of the god Ptah. When a bull died, it was embalmed and buried with a ceremony worthy of pharaohs. But here is the crux. The coffins, if that's what they are absurdly enormous. They're carved with such delicacy that even modern stonemasons get nervous when looking at them. And somehow they were transported, lowered, aligned, and placed without any margin for error. Think about it. You are lowering a 100-ton coffin lid onto a perfectly carved granite base in a completely dark tunnel without cranes, pulleys, or anything. And they did it 24 times. How? Nobody knows. This is what's believed to have happened. The Serapeum was rediscovered in 1850 by French archaeologist Auguste Mariette, who was following the ancient accounts of Strabo and Pliny. He noticed a sphinx partially buried in the sand, began excavating, and soon unearthed an underground labyrinth of crypts and chambers full of nothing. The boxes were empty, no bulls, offerings, or mummies, just dust. Whatever would have been in them had been looted or was never placed there, which is strange considering the effort it would take to manufacture even one of these sarcophagi. We're not talking about cheap labor. We are talking about stone extracted from an Aswan mine 500 miles away, transported, carved, and polished to a mirror finish. Why manufacture 24 if they were then going to be left empty? Or better yet, what for? Were they intended for the bulls? Scientists have tried to explain it. The most recognized Egyptologists stand firm. It was a sacred burial place for the Apis bulls. They point to rough and incoherent inscriptions added during later dynasties. These seem to refer to the bulls by name, which offers some narrative continuity. But here is where logic crumbles like the bandages of a poorly made mummy. The boxes have the precision of the Old Kingdom. The inscriptions are sloppy, like graffiti carved centuries later. The craftsmanship of the box does not match the quality of the writing. It's as if someone had spray-painted a stick figure on a supercomputer and said, "Same time, from the same time." Engineering experts have examined the sarcophagi and marveled. And by marveled, we mean that they have been a little scared by how perfectly mechanized the interiors, the angles, the polishing, the symmetry are. Today, diamond-tipped drills and high-speed saws will be needed to replicate it. Some researchers have argued that these boxes were not burials at all. They could have been resonant chambers built to amplify sound or energy. Others believe they were containment devices for something powerful or dangerous. Others suggest they were vaults for knowledge that has long since vanished. But there is no physical evidence that the bulls were ever in the boxes. And no matter how much research is done, the mystery only deepens. Because if the Egyptians had the tools to do this, why haven't we found them? Where are the chisels, drills, and plans? A 100-ton stone box is not built with precision by intuition alone. It is not the IKEA of antiquity. That is deliberate, highly specialized industrial engineering. And the capium isn't the only one. Similar anomalies appear all throughout Egypt. Tools that we cannot find, cuts that we cannot replicate, and a silence we cannot interpret. They still cannot explain this. Because if you accept that the boxes were cut with ancient technology, you are admitting that we have lost something, a method, science, a tradition that disappeared without a trace. If you argue that they were manufactured with modern tools in some way by a rebellious civilization or a lost race, you open another door. That Egypt inherited a technology that it did not understand. A cult of stone. They worshipped relics they could not build, but knew were sacred. And if the boxes are not coffins, what were they? Containment devices, star maps, resonant harmonic amplifiers? No single theory fits perfectly. Each answer generates 3 new questions. And that is how the Refinement traps you, because the more you look at those black boxes, the more they begin to look like questions sculpted in stone, not tombs. Warnings. And what they might be warning us about is this. If 24 perfect granite vaults were built for something that no one ever found, what else did the Egyptians seal away? And why were they so determined to ensure they stayed closed? The Pharaoh's curse. Coincidence, mold, or something worse? The Valley of the Kings. It is dry. It is completely silent. And under the sun-bleached cliffs, something ancient is awakening. British archaeologist Howard Carter has just discovered the greatest archaeological find this century. The tomb of Tutankhamun, a child king who died at the age of 18, buried in anonymity and forgotten for more than 3,000 years. Gold shines in the torchlight. Statues, chariots, knives, jewels, gods, all intact. It is like a pharaoh's Instagram account, frozen in time. But within weeks of the tomb's opening, people begin to die. First, Lord Carnarvon, Carter's patron, dies of septicemia from an infected mosquito bite in Cairo in the middle of the night. Reportedly, the lights throughout the city go out at the moment of death. Then, a radiologist who took x-rays of the mummy. Then, the man who financed the expedition. Next, one of Carter's assistants. And then, a guy who only visited the tomb one afternoon. In a few years, more than a dozen people related to the excavation die. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the press calls it something else. The Curse of the Pharaohs. The story goes as follows. When the tomb was opened, Carter claimed to have found a clay tablet warning that death would come quickly to anyone who disturbed the king's peace. That quote has never been verified. The tablet was never photographed. Carter never mentioned it again, but the damage was already done. The Western public, already intoxicated by spiritualism, seances, and the aesthetics of the cult of death, clung to the idea of the mummy's curse as if it were a desert. Newspaper headlines exploded. Death comes for tomb raiders. The mummy's curse kills again. Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes and prominent occultist, blamed the deaths on elementals unleashed by ancient spells. And suddenly, Egypt was not only ancient but dangerous. The scientists tried to explain it. Immediately, rational minds rushed to deny this narrative. One of the most accepted theories, toxic mold. Tombs sealed for thousands of years could develop lethal fungal spores, Aspergillus flavus, Stachybotrys, or Trichoderma, that, when altered, release toxins causing respiratory failure or infections. It sounds scientific. It sounds plausible. But then you look at the pattern. Carnarvon died from infected mosquito bite. Another victim committed suicide. Another died in a car accident. None of the deaths shared symptoms. Some occurred years apart. Some people who spent more time in the tomb, including Howard Carter himself, lived to an old age. Carter died peacefully at age 64, long after the so-called curse had run its course. So, if it was a curse, it was tremendously inconsistent, which is precisely what a good curse would do. Kill just enough to instill fear, but not enough to be dismissed. They still can't explain it, because no theory fits all the data. If it was mold, why didn't everyone exposed die? If it was coincidence, why so many high-profile targets? If it was psychological, why did even skeptics get nervous? Perhaps the true power of the curse was not biochemical. Perhaps it was existential. Because here's what no one wants to say aloud. They opened the tomb too thoroughly. Tutankhamun's resting place was supposed to be secret. It was hidden under the rubble of another tomb, hastily buried, without any markings. It was not supposed to be found. It was supposed to disappear. And then the modern world burst in with flashes and funding. They unwrapped his body, cut it into pieces, and exhibited it. His knife was made of meteorite, literally forged from fallen star. His throne hinted at older gods. His tomb was too small, as if it were borrowed or reassigned. Everything about the boy king whispered one word: mistake. And maybe the curse wasn't a spell. Maybe it was a psychic reaction, a cosmic safety mechanism embedded in myth, a way to warn modern men. There are things that must remain buried. Think of it as a firewall. If you disturb the dead, you pay the price. If you ignore the symbolism, you suffer the consequences. If you reduce the sacred to spectacle, the sacred takes revenge. Even today, scientists still feel repugnance when handling ancient remains. Some have abandoned the project halfway through. Others talk about nightmares, health problems, and strange coincidences. It's not scientific, but it's human. You enter a tomb expecting to find history. You leave wondering if they have been watching you all along. The curse is real, not because it kills, but because it never fully disappears. And whether it is mold, myth, or mass hysteria, the conclusion is always the same. The dead do not like being exhumed. So, what else are we disturbed now? And what else could be awaiting an answer? The Hall of Records. The secrets beneath the Sphinx. It has been watching for 4,500 years. Imperturbable, immobile, half lion, half man, completely silent. The Great Sphinx of Giza is the oldest known monumental sculpture on Earth, and for some reason, also the most suspicious, because something is hidden under those enormous legs. If you believe the rumors, there is a chamber full of lost knowledge, a vault that predates the dynasties, a message from a forgotten world. They call it the Hall of Records, and we have been trying to reach it for centuries. This is what happens. The story goes back further than you think, not to the Egyptologists, but to the prophets. In the 20s and 30s, the American mystic Edgar Cayce, a self-proclaimed sleeping prophet, claimed that under the Sphinx there was a sealed room built by the survivors of Atlantis, a record of human history, a library of scrolls and wisdom intact since 10,500 BC. He said it would be found by the end of the 20th century. Naturally, the archaeologists laughed because that was logical. A psychic Atlantis, without credible evidence, without reason to believe. But here is the problem with legends. Sometimes they inspire investigations that reveal very real mysteries. In 1993, a team using ground-penetrating radar discovered something beneath the Sphinx: anomalies, cavities, chambers. A particularly interesting rectangular void was located directly under the Sphinx's front paws. It was perfectly shaped, perfectly situated, and utterly inaccessible. The Egyptian government quickly restricted access to the site. No excavations were allowed. No more scans published, just a shrug and a press release dismissing the sensational claims. Which, let's be honest, only made things more suspicious. Scientists tried to explain it away. Sphinx experts like Mark Lehner, who was once affiliated with the Cayce Foundation, awkwardly dismissed the idea of a Hall of Records. They insisted that the Sphinx was built around 2500 BC by the pharaoh Khafre, and that any anomalies were a natural fissure or an ancient excavation pit. But not everyone concurred. The geologist Robert Schoch observed deep vertical erosion patterns in the Sphinx enclosure that matched water erosion, not wind, suggesting that the monument had been exposed to heavy rain. But here's the most surprising thing. The last time it rained heavily in Egypt was between 7,000 and 10,000 years ago, which would mean that the Sphinx, or at least its base, could be far older than the pyramids. Perhaps not in 2500 BC, but in 10,000 BC. That changes everything. It suggests an advanced culture prior to dynastic Egypt. A culture that may have left records, perhaps even a haul. They still cannot explain it, because they do not agree at all about the Sphinx. Its head is disproportionately small. Some say it was carved from an earlier statue of a lion or jackal. Its face is so eroded that identification is impossible. Its construction lacks adequate documentation. Not even the name of Khafre is inscribed. The official history is full of gaps. Meanwhile, rumors circulate of a sealed well behind the ear of the Sphinx, that the first explorers found tunnels under its base and were ordered to cover them. That drilling test in the 1990s found an empty space a few meters from the surface and stopped suddenly. No official excavation has confirmed or denied these claims. They simply stopped talking, which may be more revealing than anything they could say. Because if there is nothing under the Sphinx, why not excavate to prove it? And if there is something, what is it? A tomb? A time capsule? A bunker from a forgotten era? Or maybe just silence, which resonates so strongly that it becomes a warning. Here is a reflection. If you were a civilization on the verge of extinction from a flood, fire, or some other cosmic cataclysm, where would you hide your knowledge? In a stone chamber sealed by time under a monument that no one could move, guarded by a symbol both human and divine. Something that could not speak, but also could not forget. A sentinel. And perhaps that is what the Sphinx is. Not just a statue or a mystery, but a container of knowledge, of memory, of a past so ancient that we can no longer even recognize it. And perhaps that is why we have never been allowed to open the chamber, if it exists. Because what we find inside could rewrite everything. Who we are, where we come from, what we have forgotten, and who helped us build. But until someone digs, really digs, we will not know. All we have is the gaze of stone and the feeling that something waits below. So go ahead, stand before the Sphinx. Look it in the eyes. Ask it what it hides. And if you listen carefully, perhaps you will begin to hear the murmur of something ancient moving underground. The lost tomb of Imhotep. Where is the god of architecture? Before Da Vinci, before Einstein, before Tesla scribbled lightning on a napkin, there was Imhotep. He was the Leonardo of Egypt, a scholar before the word existed. Chief architect, high priest, royal physician, chancellor. He designed the step pyramid of Djoser, the first pyramid ever built. He turned tombs into monuments, medicine into ritual, and stone into poetry. And then he disappeared, not figuratively, but literally. His tomb has never been found, which, if you know ancient Egypt, is crazy. They buried everyone. Bakers, cats, court managers. They labeled tombs with names, dates, and positions. They mummified teenagers without any achievement. If you died, you had a house for eternity. But the man who literally invented the tomb disappeared without a trace. This is what happened. Imhotep lived during the 27th century A.C. under the pharaoh Djoser. He is credited with designing the step pyramid of Saqqara, a 6-level stone structure that marked the beginning of pyramid construction in Egypt. Before Imhotep, tombs were simple glorified shoeboxes made of mud bricks in the sand. He changed the rules. He was not of royalty. He was not born into power. He earned everything. And that is why he achieved an unthinkable deification. Hundreds of years after his death, he was venerated as a healing god. Pilgrims visited his temples seeking healing. Later, the Greeks equated him with Asclepius, their own god of medicine. He was literally immortalized. So where's his body? Shouldn't such an important man have a great burial, a pyramid, a gold sarcophagus, a giant stone box with hieroglyphs that scream, "Here rests a genius"? Instead, we have nothing. No tomb, no confirmed mummy, no inscription that says, "Here lies Imhotep." The man who built the prototype of Egyptian eternity left no eternal trace. Scientists have tried to explain it. Many assumed that he would be buried in Saqqara, near the Step Pyramid. After all, it was his masterpiece, and the pharaohs loved to be buried near the divine. So for decades, archaeologists have been excavating, scanning, guessing with no results. Some suggest that he was buried in an unknown chamber under the vast catacombs of Saqqara, that he lies somewhere in the jungle of funerary pits under the necropolis, waiting for ground-penetrating radar to locate him and bring him to history. Others claim that he may have been buried in a secret priestly tomb, hidden to protect his legacy or status. After all, once you become a god, what matters is not so much the monuments as the mystery, but all the excavations in the same way. Empty sarcophagi, misidentified mummies, dead ends. It has become a kind of academic obsession. The Where's Waldo of ancient architecture. And this is where paranoia begins to appear. They still can't explain it because maybe Imhotep wasn't buried there. Maybe he was hidden. Some theorists, and we say it with total conviction, believe that Imhotep's knowledge was too advanced, that he possessed a forbidden science, medicine, engineering, and cosmology, ideas that were centuries ahead of their time. So, when he died, the priests sealed him and hid his knowledge, not to preserve it, but to protect the world from it. Because what if the Step Pyramid was more than just a tomb? What if it was a designed frequency device, a structure built on ley lines, tuned to the stars, intended to harness or concentrate energies that we no longer understand? What if Imhotep's genius was not only architectural, but also technological, which would change the question? It's not about where Imhotep is buried. It's about what he was buried with. Some suggest that his tomb, if found, could contain scrolls, blueprints lost to time. Others whisper about a book of Imhotep, a legendary text of medicine and metaphysics, a kind of pre-emerald tablet, a manual for manipulating reality. So yes, maybe hiding him was a smart decision. The idea of Imhotep became bigger than a man. He became a god, a myth, a symbol. And symbols do not die. They just go underground. But let's consider one last possibility, the one that no one dares include in their academic papers. What if Imhotep never died? Not like in zombie movies, not like in The Return of the Mummy, but immortalized through a ritual, ascended to a retired dimensional master. His name lived on. Their temples remained active. Their followers adored him for centuries. What if Imhotep emerged from death? What if the tomb has not vanished? Because there was never a body for burial. Think about it. He builds the first pyramid, a structure that transforms death into architecture, masters healing, astronomy, sacred geometry, deciphers the code of spirit and stone. And then he leaves, without tomb, without coffin, without clues. Only silence of a type that sounds like design. And if you wonder if that is too mystical, too conspiratorial, too ancient astronaut theoretical, well, try to explain why the most famous architect of the ancient world never had a proper address in the underworld. Because if Imhotep is really lost, what other geniuses disappeared under the sand? And what knowledge vanished with them? The unfinished obelisk, a 1,200-ton mistake. In the dusty heat of Aswan, south of Egypt, lies a stone so enormous that it distorts your sense of proportion. It does not stand. It collapses. It remains tied to earth like a half-formed thought. Half-formed, completely abandoned, and enormous. This is the unfinished obelisk, and it is literally the largest stone ever carved by the hand of man, or almost carved. It measures more than 42 meters long. It weighs 1,200 tons, equivalent to 200 African elephants or 4 fully loaded 747 airplanes. And the question that looms over it like the desert heat is this: why did they leave it? How did it happen? The obelisk is located in a granite quarry near Aswan, the same quarry that supplied the stone for some of Egypt's most iconic monuments. The pharaohs loved granite from Aswan. It was hard and red, and it shone in the sun as if it knew something you didn't. At some point during the reign of Hatshepsut, ancient engineers began working on a monument of impossible ambition, a unique monolith carved directly into bedrock. It would have been the largest obelisk ever erected, taller than any other known one by at least a third. They smoothed it, shaped it, and channeled around it. Then, at some point in the process, they stopped. A crack had formed near its base. Perhaps it was a structural flaw. Perhaps the granite rebelled. Perhaps someone panicked. Whatever the case, they abandoned the project completely. But here's the part that makes no sense. How did they plan to move it? Even if the stone had not cracked, how do you lift 1,200 tons of granite? It was not a freestanding sculpture. It was part of the earth. And nevertheless, the entire process, the smooth channels, the precise angles, suggest that they had a plan. But there are no records, no notes, no diagrams, just tool marks still visible on the stone, like ghosts of a past ambition. Scientists have tried to explain it. Some say it was a simple case of trial and error. One carves in a big way, one fails in a big way, and one moves forward to try again in the next dynasty. Others suggest the crack meant a death sentence. A weak point in a structure under great tension, like an obelisk, could cause catastrophic collapse. And in a religious culture obsessed with perfection, even a small defect meant failure. So they left. End of story. Except that no one has really tried replicating the method. To carve this obelisk, the ancient workers used dolerite balls, hard stones they repeatedly hit against the granite. You can still see the small impact craters. Over time, those small holes formed grooves outlining the monolith. But here is the problem. That method would take decades, not years, decades. And that assuming thousands of workers worked in shifts throughout the day at 100 degrees, with no margin for error and no machinery to lift the structure once finished. Among alternative theorists grows suspicion that the official method is not viable, that it would have required more than labor, perhaps lost tools, perhaps techniques we do not understand. And that is where rumors begin. They still cannot explain it because there is no physical evidence of a system that could lift, transport, and erect a stone of that size. There are no ramps large enough, nor levers strong enough, nor platforms with wheels wide enough, nor any documentation. And, nevertheless, other obelisks were moved, some standing, others tall. We still do not know exactly how, but the Egyptians did it to perfection. And some of those obelisks are now in places like Rome, Paris, London, and New York, still standing, still proud. So, if they could move a 300-ton obelisk, why risk building one 4 times as large? What if the unfinished obelisk was not a mistake? What if it was a statement? Think about it. The Egyptians were master storytellers in stone. They did not waste effort. They did not leave unfinished works for fun. If they left, it was because it meant something. Perhaps the obelisk was destined to remain unfinished. Perhaps the crack was symbolic, a rupture of divine ambition. Perhaps it marks the limit of what they could do or what they were allowed to do. Or perhaps, just perhaps, they had the means to move it and something or someone made them stop. That is the part that no one talks about. What if the problem was not engineering, but intervention? A divine warning, a political change, a sudden loss of knowledge, or perhaps a change of power, a death, a coup, a curse, a single crack that crumbled everything. The largest monument ever built is not abandoned unless something has gone terribly wrong. And when you stand next to the unfinished obelisk, it does not look like failure. It looks like a message, like a monument to the limits of the idea that even stone gods must sometimes give way. Because if a civilization that built pyramids could not finish this, what were they really trying to do? And why did they stop? The lost labyrinth of Hara, the missing temple of Egypt. Herodotus was many things. Tourist, gossip, semi-reliable historian. But one thing he was not was subtle. So when he described a building in Egypt that made the pyramids look like cheap condominiums, people paid attention. It had 3,000 rooms, half above ground and the other half underground. It was full of columns, courtyards, corridors, and closed chambers. Its walls were covered with carvings. Its roof was made of a single stone slab. And Herodotus swore that even the pyramids paled in comparison. That building was called the Labyrinth of Hira, and today it no longer exists. This is what happened. In the 5th century BC, Herodotus visited Egypt and documented what he saw or what he was told. His description of the labyrinth is impressive. It seemed to me that it even surpassed the pyramids. It has 12 courtyards, and the walls are covered with carvings. The ceilings of all rooms are made of stone, and the entire building is full of winding corridors. He claimed that the labyrinth was located near the pyramid of Amenhotep in the Fayum Oasis. Other ancient authors, such as Strabo, Diodorus, and Pliny the Elder, confirmed it. They all described the same general structure, the same grandeur, the same feeling of overwhelming scale. It was not a myth. It was a consensus. And then at some point in the last 2,000 years, it disappeared, with no ruins standing, no imposing walls, no epic underground chambers, just flat ground, crumbling limestone, and a vague outline in the earth. So what happened? Scientists have tried to explain it. Archaeologists believe that the labyrinth was real and that it was dismantled stone by stone in later times. The limestone was valuable. No gods are needed to steal it, just contractors. But here comes the strange thing. Even after centuries of looting, one would expect to find foundations, fragments, or anything that resembled a 3,000-room megacomplex. But the ground is almost empty. In the 19th century, Flinders Petrie, the grandfather of Egyptology, excavated the site. He confirmed that there was something there. He found foundations, fragments of ceramics, and part of a giant stone slab, possibly the roof that Herodotus described. But even Petrie was disconcerted. He expected more. A building the size of a city is not lost just like that. Such an enormous temple is not forgotten. A map was needed, unless something else had buried it. In 2008, a team of researchers using ground-penetrating radar claimed to detect underground anomalies in Hawara. Structures, chambers, grid patterns, rectilinear geometry compatible with walls and rooms. Their conclusion: the labyrinth could still be there, buried under 45 meters of Nile sediments. It was not dismantled. It was submerged. And due to groundwater, bureaucratic restrictions, and general archaeological paralysis, no full excavation has been carried out since then. The most detailed underground structure in ancient Egyptian literature remains hidden in the mud. They still cannot explain it because none of the known plans of the funerary complex of Amenhotep III coincide with the descriptions of Herodotus. They don't even come close. Either Herodotus lied, which is unlikely since other historians confirmed it, or we're facing a structure that has not yet been excavated, a second level, deeper and more vast, that still lies under the silt. Or maybe we're not getting the point. What if the labyrinth was not just a building? What if it was a machine? Some esoteric scholars believe that the labyrinth had a ritual or energetic function, such as a symbolic map of the underworld, a temple of paths, a labyrinth for the soul. The Greeks certainly believed it that way. Many related it to the myth of Daedalus and the Minotaur, a story with roots in Egypt, not in the Cree Indians. They believed that going through the labyrinth had transformative effects, that the journey was more than physical. Which raises another question. What if the labyrinth was never designed to be found? What if it was used once for a ceremony, a burial, a rite, and then erased on purpose? The idea is not so far-fetched. In Egypt, sacred places were often buried on purpose to protect them from decomposition, theft, or misuse. The labyrinth could have held secrets, relics, or even records that later dynasties wanted to hide. Think about it. A temple bigger than a pyramid, full of thousands of rooms. No treasures, no mummies, just walls. Why build something like that? Unless it was not about what was inside, but about what it was meant to confuse. Some believe that the labyrinth was designed to trap something. A spirit, a force, or a truth. And if that is true, then maybe the labyrinth did not disappear. Maybe it was sealed, which means that the warnings in the ancient texts were not just hyperboles. They were instructions. Do not open it. Do not dig too much. Let the gods sleep. Because if you build a labyrinth to lock something up, what happens when modern humans find the entrance? The twisted pyramid. An error or a message. At first glance, it looks like a pyramid having a midlife crisis. It begins to rise like all the others. Sharp, proud, defiant against the sky. Then, halfway up, bends. The slope changes. The angle softens. It curves inward as if it had been shy midway through its construction. This is the twisted pyramid of Neferu. And no one agrees on whether it is an engineering error, a course correction, or a cosmic joke. But one thing is clear. It should not look like this. This is what happened. The twisted pyramid is located in Dashur, south of Cairo. It was commissioned by the pharaoh Neferu, founder of the 4th dynasty and father of Khufu. Yes, that Khufu, the guy with the big ego. Neferu was a pyramid enthusiast. He built at least 3 more than any other pharaoh, just to make sure he had options in the afterlife. The twisted pyramid was his second attempt. It began with a steep slope of 54 degrees, a bold inclination that looked great on paper until someone did the calculations. Halfway through, the architects changed the angle to 43 degrees. The result is a sudden break in the pyramid's shape that looks like it shrank halfway through construction. The official version is that they miscalculated. The steep angle caused structural instability. Cracks were forming. Collapse was imminent. So they adjusted it and finished it with a less steep angle, which is fair and reasonable. The ancient world also had trial and error, except that the leaning pyramid is still standing. It has not collapsed. It has not sunk. It has not slid into the sand. For 1,600 years later, the unstable design is still standing. And that is what bothers people most. The scientists have tried to explain it. The majority agrees the angle was modified for security. But even that theory has its problems. Firstly, the engineering techniques necessary to build the inclined pyramid, with its complex internal chambers and its double entrances, suggest deep foresight. It was not simply an amateur project. They knew just what they were doing. Secondly, why not just start again? If the structure was unstable halfway, why not abandon it, as they did with the unfinished obelisk, and build another? Sun Fu had plenty of money. He had enough labor. He even came to build the Red Pyramid, which was perfect, without curves, but only symmetry. So, why preserve this inclined pyramid? Why not just hide the error? Unless it was not an error at all. They still cannot explain it, because the pyramid works far too well to be an error. Inside, the inclined pyramid has characteristics not found in later structures, such as 2 funerary chambers located at different heights and connected by an inclined corridor. Some believe that it was symbolic, a duality between death and rebirth, light and darkness, high and low. Others believe the pyramid was a point of transition, a bridge between 2 sacred angles. The lower part, with a steeper inclination of 54 degrees, symbolizes spiritual ascent. The upper part, with a smoother inclination of 43 degrees, symbolizes stabilization, reincarnation, or enlightenment. Do not see it as an error, but a message carved in stone. Some esoteric researchers have even suggested the 2 angles represent celestial harmonic frequencies encoded in the architecture. That the pyramid is an acoustic device designed to resonate with the natural vibration of the earth, or act as a tuning fork for spiritual energy. And then there's the mirror effect. If you place a mirror horizontally in the center of the inclined pyramid, the upper part is reflected into a perfect diamond. A double pyramid, one pointing up, the other down. As above, so it is below. Does that sound familiar to you? It should be. It is about the ancient Hermetic symbolism, the dualism, the sacred geometry, the cosmic symmetry, and it is embedded in a structure 1,000 years before those ideas were written. A coincidence? Perhaps so, but maybe it is not. Because here's another theory, a dark one. What if the inclined pyramid aimed at warning future builders? A monument to failure, not as an architectural lesson, but of arrogance. If you start too steep, you get too far, and everything falls apart. So you change course, compromise, and finish it crooked, but not broken. It becomes a metaphor for leadership, a symbol of change under pressure, or even worse, of surrender to limitations that nobody wants to admit exist. And here is the disturbing thing. The inclined pyramid never served as a tomb. There is no burial, mummy, or sarcophagus. Sneferu was buried in the Red Pyramid, his next attempt. So, why keep the inclined one standing still? Perhaps because it was not for the dead. Perhaps it was really for us. A monument to duality itself, to the moment when perfection succumbed to its own ambition. A scar and a stone remind us that even kings falter, because if the pyramid was destined to reach the sky, the curvature tells us what happens when the skies resist it. The stellar ducts, stellar doors, spiritual tubes, or anything else. Inside the Great Pyramid are tunnels, not corridors or chambers, only ducts. Narrow, claustrophobic corridors, each about 20 centimeters wide. Too small for a person, too long for decoration, too precise to be a mistake. They rise at carefully calculated angles from the king's chamber and the queen's chamber, crossing millions of tons of stone and pointing directly at specific stars. We call them air ducts, but that is a terrible name because they are not for air. They are for something else, and nobody can agree on what. That is how it works. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, the largest and most studied monument on Earth, has 4 of these mysterious channels. 2 from the king's chamber, pointing to the north and south. 2 from the queen's chamber, also pointing north and south, although the lower ones do not even completely open to the outside. The angles are not random. The south duct of the king's chamber points directly to the belt of Orion, specifically to Al-Nitak, the star associated with Osiris, the god of death and rebirth. The north duct points to Thuban, the polar star at the time the pyramid was built. The ducts of the queen's chamber are similarly aligned and point towards Sirius, the star of the goddess Isis, and another towards what could have been a sacred circumpolar star. It is not a coincidence. It is stellar mathematics. Laser-guided geometry from 2500 BC. And these ducts are so well carved that engineers in the 1990s sent crawler robots to explore them. That is where things got even stranger. Scientists try to explain this. When the German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink sent his Robot 2, which climbed through the well of the South Queen's chamber, it traveled about 65 m and encountered a door, a small slab with 2 copper handles that looked like it was taken from a miniature horror movie. A sealed portal. So, naturally, in 2002, National Geographic sent another robot. This one carried a drill and a camera to spy. Behind the first door, another small chamber, and then another door. So there's a tunnel that leads to a sealed stone door that leads to a mysterious chamber that ends in another sealed door. Since then, nothing more has been revealed to the public. The official explanation. These are symbolic passages, spiritual conduits to the afterlife. The wells allow the pharaoh's soul to escape and ascend to the heavens, where it joins with the gods. It is poetic, but also suspiciously convenient. Because when you have perfectly designed tunnels, too narrow for humans, too precise to be the result of chance, you start to wonder, what if they are not just symbolic? What if they are functional? They still cannot explain it because there is no practical reason for the duct's existence. They are not necessary for ventilation. The internal chambers are sealed. They are not decorative. They cannot even be seen without robots. They're not structural. Removing the stone makes a weaker structure, not stronger. They have no purpose except the one we cannot name, which opens the door to more esoteric ideas. Some believe that the wells are resonant conduits that the pyramid used as a harmonic generator and that these tunnels channeled energy outward like antennas. Others suggest that they were part of a stellar alignment ritual used during coronation or funerary rites to sync the pharaoh's soul with the constellations. And then there are the really strange things. A marginal theory claims that the ducts are time-encoded memory locks aligned with specific celestial events that, when repeated in future millennia, will unlock something inside the pyramid, like a cosmic countdown. Does that sound far-fetched? Sure. But so is digging a tunnel with millimeter precision that connects to a specific star's position 4,500 years ago using nothing more than ropes, pulleys, and observation. There's also the annoying detail that we still do not know what is behind those doors. What do they hide? A relic, a mechanism, a sealed message, or simply more stone? No one has been allowed to drill further. No one has entered, not even robots. And when you think that this pyramid has gaps, sealed chambers, and ducts guided by stars, you begin to feel that all this was not meant to be understood. It was meant to confuse us, like a riddle with too many answers or a machine that we have forgotten how to turn on. Because what if the Great Pyramid was never a tomb? What if it were a device, a spiritual engine, a resurrection machine, a calendar synchronized to the cosmos? Or perhaps, just perhaps, a record, a story told not with words, but with angles and silence. And if the ducts really point towards the stars, then perhaps they were not for the pharaoh's soul. Maybe they were for someone else, someone who watched from the other side. The tomb of Osiris, found then forgotten. It all begins with a well dug in bedrock, filled with water and hidden under the road that lead from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid. In 1999, the Egyptian archaeologist Dr. 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐤 led a televised excavation that would grab headlines, surprise everyone, and then disappear from the face of the earth. Because, as reported, what he found down there was not just another chamber. It was not the tomb of a prince, a high priest, or noble. It looked a lot like the tomb of Osiris. Yes, that Osiris, god of the dead, lord of the underworld, the one who was dismembered by his jealous brother and resurrected by Isis. A myth, a god, a metaphor, or perhaps something more. So what happened is the following. Using a series of deep vertical wells under the Giza Plateau, 𝐤𝐨 and his team descended through multiple levels. These were dug directly into limestone, some filled with stagnant green water. At the bottom, about 30 meters underground, there was a large chamber. Inside, a central stone sarcophagus, now empty, surrounded by 6 smaller niches, possibly symbolic tombs. The chamber itself was carved in the shape of an ankh, the symbol of eternal life, and everything was oriented in a deliberately ritual way. 𝐤𝐤𝐤 claimed that it was a symbolic tomb, a cenotaph, a representation of the burial of Osiris, not the real tomb. But that explanation seemed rushed. No one knew this chamber existed. It did not appear on any maps. It had not been shown to the public. The excavation was televised once and never again. The subsequent documentation was scarce, the photos scarce, and access restricted. Since then, the place has been sealed. Scientists have tried to explain it. The official version. It was part of the Osiris cult of the late era. A ceremonial tomb built by priests to honor the god. Nothing literal, nothing divine, just another underground ritual place, one of many. But if that is true, why so much secrecy? Why seal it up? Why was the water left inside? And more disturbingly, why has no one else been allowed to study it? Unsurprisingly, alternative theorists jumped to the attack. Some suggested that the chamber predated dynastic Egypt, possibly dating back to 10,000 BC, and that it was only co-opted by later religious cults. Others claimed that it was the true tomb of someone who inspired the Osiris myth. That perhaps Osiris was never just a god, but a real person, a deified ruler, buried and reborn through legend. And if that possibility is considered, the implications extend beyond the Nile because it suggests that the entire myth of Osiris, the dismemberment, death, resurrection, may be a historical allegory, a memory transmitted as religion, a trauma preserved as theology. It suggests that long before the dynasties, there was a king, a brother, and a body. And that body could still be somewhere under Giza. They still can't explain it because they stopped talking about it. Literally, after the televised special of 1999, the site was quietly closed. There are no academic articles, no peer-reviewed follow-ups, no international teams invited, just silence. And one has to wonder why. If it's just a symbolic chamber, what's wrong with studying it? Why not finish the excavation? Why not go further? Unless they've already done it and didn't like what they found. Because this is where things get difficult. Ancient texts describe the tomb of Osiris as located underground, in a chamber surrounded by water, under a hill near a sacred lion. In many ancient traditions, the Sphinx is related to the lion. The Giza Plateau is full of hills. The chamber is underground and flooded. The coincidence is disturbingly close, which means that either the ancient priests were incredibly committed to the accuracy of the narration, the myths are based on real structures, or we have simply unearthed something that we should never have understood. Because what if the myths were not fiction? What if they were redacted history and the tomb was not symbolic? It was a warning or a container. Think about it. You build a chamber under the most sacred place in your civilization. You fill it with water. You seal it. You build a sphinx on top. And then you wait for history to fade into religion. Because maybe Osiris was not just a god of the dead. Maybe it was someone or something we couldn't afford to forget. Or even worse, something we couldn't risk remembering. The light of Dendera, ancient electricity or cosmic metaphor. On the walls of the temple of Hathor, deep within the Dendera complex, there's an engraving that refuses to behave. It is hidden in a crypt, a chamber that few tourists reach. It is not grandiose. It is not flashy. It is not even well lit. And yet, what it shows has given rise to thousands of late-night documentaries and more than one tremendously presumptuous YouTube channel. Because it looks like this: a god or a priest standing next to an elongated, crystal-like object shaped like a light bulb. Inside, a snake coils like a filament. A thick stem at the base, a cable-like tail connecting to what looks like a box. It has been called the light of Dendera. And, depending on who you ask, it is a symbolic representation of rebirth, a misinterpreted religious motif, or an electrical device from the year 300 A. See, this is what is believed. The temple dates from the Tumor period, approximately 300 B. CB. C. Although the site is much older. Like many Egyptian sacred places, the newer temples were built on top of the older ones, preserving the traditions and, sometimes, the oldest secrets. The crypts of Dendera are unique. They are small, narrow, and difficult to access. And on these walls are some of Egypt's strangest reliefs. The Dendera light is the most famous. One version shows the device held by a god, with ink-shaped ropes extending to a square box labeled as the god's energy. Another version includes baboon-headed figures linked to Thoth, the god of knowledge. The most widespread explanation is that this is a mythological scene. The serpent represents the god 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐿 emerging from a lotus flower, a symbol of rebirth and cosmic balance. The light bulb is simply a stylized uterus or vessel. The box is a pedestal. The tail is a decorative ornament. Calm down, but here's the problem. It really looks like a light bulb. Scientists have tried to explain it. The most recognized Egyptologists maintain that the Dendera images are purely symbolic, artistic conventions, nothing more. But electrical engineers have examined the reliefs and said, yes, that could work. In the 1990s, a team in Austria built a functional model based on the relief. A Crookes tube filled with gas powered by high voltage. The snake-shaped electric arc curved exactly like the Dendera carving. It shone. It worked. So, if it is theoretically possible, could the Egyptians have achieved it? Maybe. But here the problems arise. There is no evidence of electrical infrastructure. There are no energy sources, no cables, no carbon residues, no plugs, no switches, no burnt light bulbs, no copper cables running under the floors of the temples like ancient spaghetti conduits. And yet, many Egyptian tombs have no soot marks on their ceilings. If they use torches or oil lamps to paint and carve, why are there no black stains after thousands of years of fire? Some speculate that they used reflective mirrors, but that quickly becomes ineffective. Others say they used very controlled flames. Others whisper about the Dendera. They still cannot explain it because the image is too anomalous from a technical perspective. It's not just that it looks like a light bulb. It's that the whole composition suggests an energy system, a circuit, the light bulb, the power box, the cable, the operator, the arc. Even if it is a myth disguised as mechanics. And it raises the usual uncomfortable question. If they didn't have electricity, why does it look like they did? Is it a coincidence? Is it a case of modern minds projecting technology backwards into symbolism? Or did someone somewhere preserve the memory of a time when light did not come from fire? There's also the esoteric view that the Dendera device was metaphysical, not electrical. That the light it represents was not literal, but spiritual illumination. According to this view, the crypt was an initiation chamber. The images symbolized awakening, not voltage, the light of the serpent of wisdom, the uterus of transformation. So perhaps the light of Dendera was not meant to shine, but to illuminate. And that could be the most Egyptian answer of all. Because when you stare at the light of Dendera long enough, you start to realize that it doesn't matter what it is. What matters is what it makes you ask. Did the Egyptians use science in service of religion? Or did they encode science within religion? Was the light considered sacred? Or was the sacred made of light? In any case, the carving shines with a mystery that no one has managed to unveil. Because if it was an electrical device, it would rewrite the timeline. And if it was not, it could be the most advanced metaphor ever carved in stone. The abyss under Giza, tunnels, floods, and buried cities. Under Giza, there is silence. Not the silence of the open desert, nor the sacred silence of tombs. It is the humid, heavy silence of tunnels, of something enormous under something older, a place that should not exist but that refuses to disappear. Over the decades, rumors have emerged, whispered by locals, hinted at by explorers, and occasionally glimpsed by researchers of a vast underground complex under the Giza Plateau. Not only tombs, not only catacombs, but vaults, chambers, entire rooms sealed, forgotten, and possibly flooded. A lost city, or, even worse, a city destined to remain lost forever. That is how it is. The idea of an underground Giza is nothing new. Even Herodotus mentioned passages under the plateau's corridors that connected the pyramids with the temples, the kings with the gods, the living with the afterlife. In 1935, the British explorer Dr. Salam Hassan excavated deep chambers and wells under the plateau. His notes, some of which were never fully published, refer to underground rooms and galleries filled with water that did not match the known tombs. Later, Andrew Collins, a writer and researcher, claimed to have discovered evidence of a huge cave system under the plateau. With the help of local informants and remote sensing, he described a network of chambers and corridors that extended under the Sphinx and toward the pyramids, one supposedly the size of a cathedral. In the 1990s, studies with ground-penetrating radar, some carried out by Thomas DeBecke and John Anthony West, revealed geometric anomalies under the Giza Plateau, rectangular hollows, underground cavities, chambers in places that were officially supposed to be solid rock. And in 2017, 𝐦𝐨𝐬, in an unusual moment of semi-recognition, admitted in an interview that there were many things under Giza that had not been excavated and that perhaps would not be for a long time. But these statements never continued. The excavations ceased. Was the investigation stopped or buried? The scientists try to explain this. Conventional Egyptology admits that, yes, there are tunnels under Giza. Some are natural fissures within a limestone. Others are artificial wells connected to known tombs or burial pits. But the idea of a large-scale, organized complex, a literal underground city, is dismissed as a fringe theory. Even so, explorers who ventured into restricted areas describe water-filled passageways with finished walls, chambers too large for burials, niches with no apparent function and no inscriptions, long corridors that seem to lead nowhere, and water being the most disturbing part. Flooded tunnels have been found in many places on the plateau. The most famous is the one found under the so-called Well of Osiris, near the Causeway of the Sphinxes, a chamber 30 meters deep, submerged in green, stagnant water. What lies under the water? We do not know, because no one can find out, which raises the question again. If there is nothing down there, why is access still denied? And if there is something, what kind of something is worth keeping secret for almost a century? They still cannot explain it because they have never excavated most of it. The Egyptian government maintains an official position of preservation, which, to be fair, is valid. You cannot excavate around the foundations of a 4,500-year-old monument without consequences. But preservation often becomes the perfect excuse for secrecy. And when that secrecy surrounds sealed underground structures in the most sacred part of the ancient world, conspiracy theories soon appear. Some claim that the tunnels are part of an ancient initiation system, a school for priests, or even guardians of ancestral knowledge. Others believe that the underground network was a refuge, a bunker built after a prehistoric cataclysm by a civilization that survived the flood and transmitted its wisdom to dynastic Egypt. Others claim that the Giza Plateau was never just a necropolis, but a machine, and that the underground system is part of its energy source, now inactive. But the most disturbing theory is that what is down there is not entirely dead. Not people, not mummies, but dangerous concepts, things that cannot be unlearned once discovered. That is why no government, ancient or modern, has dared to open the deepest vaults. Because the Giza Plateau, with all its sunlight and symmetry, sits on a closed basement, a vault, a prison, a secret carved in stone, buried in water, and deliberately forgotten. And if we ever open it, we will not only be digging in a rock, we will be breaking a seal. The apocalypse of the animal mummies, a massive sacrifice, or something even stranger. It is to be expected to find some cats in ancient Egypt. Perhaps a mummified crocodile or two, an ibis if we're lucky. What you don't expect is to find millions of them. Mass graves, crypts the size of warehouses, entire tunnels full of animal coffins stacked as if they were merchandise. Cats, hawks, snakes, baboons, bulls, beetles, mongooses, shrews. If it walked, crawled, flew, or slithered, the Egyptians probably wrapped it in linen and gave it a sarcophagus. We're not talking about pets buried with their owners. We're talking about mummification on an industrial scale. The apocalypse of the animal mummies. And here comes the strangest thing. We still don't know why. This is what happened. Animal cults were fundamental to the religion of ancient Egypt. Each important deity had an equivalent animal. Bada had cats. Thoth had ibis and baboons. Horus had hawks. Anubis had the jackals. And the crocodiles. And let's not even talk about the beetles. So yes, animals were sacred. They were messengers, symbols, even avatars of the gods. But from 700 AC, something changed. Animal burials became very popular. The temples became mummy factories. The priests raised animals in captivity, sacrificed them en masse, mummified the corpses, and sold them to the pilgrims. These were spiritual bribes. If you paid for a cat mummy, your prayers reached Batet faster. Some estimates suggest that more than 70 million animals were mummified. Think about it. 70 million. To put it in perspective, that is more than the current human population of Egypt. Scientists have tried to explain it. The first Egyptologists assumed that they were pets or ritual animals of the elite, but most of the mummies are too poorly preserved for that. Computed tomographies show that many are incomplete. There are only bones or piles of feathers. Some contain no remains, only cloth, resin, and air. False mummies, mass-produced spiritual substitutes. It was a business. But what kind of business needs to produce millions of corpses? And where were they going? Catacombs have been found in Tuna Elgil with ibis and baboons, in Saqqara with cats and bulls, on the Hill of the Crocodiles, in Combo, and even small tombs for beetles. These are not isolated cases, but industries. They required infrastructure, labor, ritual knowledge, and economic coordination, all for animals that were raised, sacrificed, and buried, sometimes in a matter of hours. And still, the motivation seems too cold, too transactional for a civilization that buried its dead with gold masks and divine poetry. Which raises the real question. Were the Egyptians only honoring the gods or feeding something? They still cannot explain it because no theory fully justifies the magnitude. Devotion, of course. Symbolism, of course, but 70 million. Why such extremes? Some historians now speculate that the practice was not only about appeasing, but containing, that animal cults were ritual management systems, mechanisms to absorb, neutralize, or redirect cosmic energy. The mummified animals were not gifts. They were barriers. Offerings, yes, but also locks. Think about it. You're trying to control chaos, death time, so you sacrifice in cycles. Millions of lives, small, replaceable, symbolic, again and again, for centuries. What does that sound like? A spell being repeated. A loop, a program, a firewall of bones. Or maybe it was even stranger than that. Some researchers believe that animal cults did not worship symbols, but chimeras, beings, hybrid gods, entities older than language. According to this theory, animals were avatars, bodies for something else to inhabit. The act of mummifying them, containing like putting lightning in a jar and burying it before it strikes. In 2015, scientists from Manchester scanned hundreds of animal mummies. What they found was not just bones. There were inconsistencies, errors, missing parts, strange arrangements, a pattern of failure, or perhaps a pattern of warning. Because if the mummies were not always real, maybe it was never about animals. Maybe it was about the ritual, the wrapping, the burial, the repetition, as if the world depended on doing it right. And if that is true, what happens when the ritual stops? What happens when the offerings run out? What were they still feeding? And what happens when it gets hungry again? The Rosetta Stone, code decipher or censorship. It deciphered the code. It unlocked a language. It gave voice to the dead and turned scribbles into writings. The Rosetta Stone is usually treated as Egypt's definitive answer. The end of the mystery. The moment when the ancient walls began to speak. But what if we are wrong? Or worse yet, what if we only decipher what we're supposed to understand? Because here is the irony. The Rosetta Stone taught us to read hieroglyphs, but no one asks why it had to be written 3 times, or what it is not telling us. This is what happened. Discovered in 1799 by French soldiers during Napoleon's campaign in Egypt, the Rosetta Stone was found near the city of Rashid, or Rosetta, buried in the foundations of a ruined wall. It is not gold. It is not grandiose. It is a dark granodiorite steel, approximately 1.5 meters high. But on it is engraved the same passage in 3 writings. Hieroglyphs for the gods, deotics for the priests, Greek for the bureaucrats. And what does it say? Basically, a tax exemption. No, seriously. The text is a decree issued in the year 196 A.C.E. by the priests in honor of Tommy V. In it, his good deeds are enumerated, his divine condition is declared, and it says that the decree must be displayed in 3 alphabets, a public relations campaign carved in stone. But this boring administrative record ended up as the key that Jean-Francois Champlain used to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs in 1822. Enter the textbooks. Enter the triumph. Enter the museum plaque on scene. But then the questions arise. Why was it buried? Why was it fragmented? Why was the same text written in 3 different languages when most recipients were illiterate? And most importantly, what don't we have? The scientists tried to explain it. It was probably buried or reused as construction material during the later years of the Roman Empire or the first of Islam. Egypt was full of ancient stones. The temples were looted for construction. The Rosetta Stone, modest and broken, was probably just rubble, except for the fact that it was deliberately inscribed in 3 languages by priests during a time of political instability using religious, civil, and foreign writings. That is not a coincidence. And although it deciphered the hieroglyphs for us, it has never been clear to what extent the translation is complete. Scholars admit that Egyptian hieroglyphs are symbolically dense. Each glyph can mean several things depending on the context, the tone, the location, and the reader. It is not enough to translate into Greek and move on. You have to interpret and filter it. Thus, the Rosetta Stone gave us access to the language, but not necessarily to the intention behind it. Some researchers now believe that hieroglyphs were multi-layered communication tools that encoded meaning not only phonetically, but energetically. Sacred resonance, sound, form, idea. From that point of view, translating them into bureaucratic Greek is like trying to translate a symphony into an Excel spreadsheet. Something is lost, or worse, something is omitted. They still can't explain it, because we don't know if the Rosetta Stone was original. Many believe that it was a copy, one of many stelae that repeated the same decree scattered throughout Egypt as divine press releases. Others suspect that it was a reproduction of an older source. But what if it wasn't about making the language accessible? What if it was about controlling what was transmitted? Think about it. You are a priest in a decaying civilization. Greek lords, internal disturbances, spiritual confusion. So you take your sacred language, a language transmitted since the time of the gods, and reduce it to a digestible and politically safe format. You translate it into the language of power, commerce, and compromise. And then you bury it, not to preserve it, but to delay it. Perhaps the Rosetta Stone was not a Rosetta Stone. Perhaps it was a time capsule, something left for a later generation, for us to decipher. Not to understand what the ancients knew, but to understand what they were afraid to say aloud. Because if hieroglyphs were really a sacred system, a magical language, then deciphering them was never just about words. It was about awakening something. And perhaps that is why much of what we read in the translation seems empty, dry, repetitive, boring, because we're not reading the real message. We read the edited one, a stone full of half-truths, a translation that only works on the surface. So the question is, if the Rosetta Stone was a filter, where is the complete transmission? The face of the Sphinx. Khafre, a stranger or something more ancient. You can spend hours before the great Sphinx of Giza and never get an answer. It doesn't blink. It doesn't move. It just looks with a face so familiar, yet so unknown. Who is it? Ask the tourist guides, and they will tell you in unison. Khafre. Ask the textbooks, and they will tell you that it probably is Khafre. Ask the Sphinx, and it will answer with a silence that makes you feel uncomfortable. Because the truth is that we do not know whose face that really is. And the theories that try to answer that question raise others far more disturbing. The thing is like that. The Sphinx is the largest monolithic statue on Earth. It measures 73 meters long, 20 meters high, and is carved from a single block of limestone older than our entire civilization. Traditionally, it is said that it represents the pharaoh Khafre, who ruled during the 4th dynasty, the same one to whom the construction of the second pyramid of Giza is attributed. The logic is circular. Khafre built the pyramid next to it. Therefore, the Sphinx must represent him because it is close to his pyramid, which we know is his because it is close to the Sphinx. That is not proof. It is a vicious circle of assumptions. There is no inscription on the Sphinx that mentions Khafre. There are no cartouches, hieroglyphs, or anything carved on the Sphinx that allows the face to be identified. Therefore, we rely on stylistic comparisons. The shape of the nose, what remains of it, the angle of the jaw, the way the headdress falls. But here's the problem. The face does not match other statues of Khafre. His features are softer, rounder, less symmetrical. Some believe that it shows Nubian characteristics, suggesting a different ethnicity. Others point out that the face is too small for the body. It is true. Proportionally, the head of the Sphinx is too small. It does not match the body of the lion in scale, as if it had been carved later on something older, which opens the door to new possibilities. What if the Sphinx was recarved? What if the original head, now lost, represented something else? A lion, a jackal, a god that no one wanted to name? Scientists have tried to explain it. The most prominent Egyptologists argue that the Sphinx was carved during the reign of Khafre based on a road that connected his pyramid with the Temple of the Sphinx and on vague theories about alignment. But in 1991, the geologist Robert Schoch brought up a theory that drove the scientific community crazy. He proposed that the deep vertical erosion in the enclosure of the Sphinx could only have been caused by prolonged heavy rains, of the kind that have not been seen in Egypt since around 700 BC. That would make the base of the Sphinx thousands of years older than Khafre. The world of Egyptology did not take it well. They accused Schoch of everything from amateurism to heresy. But others began to join the chorus, including John Anthony West, who argued that the Sphinx was part of a forgotten pre-dynastic civilization, later co-opted by the pharaohs. And if that is true, then the face we see now is not the original. It is a cover-up, a replacement, a political movement, or a tribute made centuries later, carving the face of a pharaoh on the body of a god. They still cannot explain it because the inconsistencies do not disappear. The Sphinx looks directly east, perfectly aligned with the rising sun on the spring equinox. Its body is leonine, but no statues are known from the time of Khafre that combine lion and man. Its temple is built with limestone blocks extracted directly from the blocks of the body of the Sphinx, so enormous that its placement is an engineering enigma in itself. It is as if the Sphinx were not a project. It was a rescue operation, a preservation of something older, something sacred, something not meant to be understood, only preserved. And here is an uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps the original Sphinx did not have a human face. Perhaps it had a lion's head, aligned with the constellation of Leo around 10,500 BC. See, when the Sphinx would have looked at its celestial twin on the horizon. Or perhaps it had no face at all. Perhaps it was an empty vessel, a spiritual node, a cosmic mirror, a symbol of eternity not yet personalized by the human ego. Until someone, perhaps Khafre, perhaps not, came and said, "Let my face be remembered," and in doing so literally rewrote history, which means that every photograph we have taken, every tourist selfie, every glossy cover of National Geographic could be showing us a falsification, a mask that hides an older god or something stranger. Because if the Sphinx does not show us a king, and if it is not Khafre, whose face is it? And what appearance did the original have? Or perhaps, what is even more chilling, what happened to the face that was there before? The Serapeum Redux, the box that must not be opened. We have been here before. The Serapeum of Saqqara, the underground stone crypt of Egypt. Home to 24 granite sarcophagi, each heavier than a locomotive, each carved with such surgical precision that fate could be sealed inside and never leak out. They call them the boxes of bulls. But let's be honest, no bull has ever needed a precision of polished black granite to the micron. We have already wondered why they were built, but now we must ask ourselves something darker. What if one opens? What is inside it? Is there somewhere in the silent corridors of the Serapeum a box slightly different from the others? It is not better carved. It is not newer, but its lid is cracked. Just enough to notice, enough to wonder. The first reports came in a low voice, amateur videos, marginal forums, whispers from travelers claiming to have seen the gap. It was not a complete break, but a change as if something was pressing upward from the inside. Just a fraction of an inch. Enough to take your breath away for a second. Was it natural, seismic, or symbolic? And then silence. Official Egyptology says nothing. Tour guides have been asked to keep visitors away. The chamber is not photographed, and any attempt to see it in detail is blocked. So of course the theories are shooting up. Scientists have tried to explain it. An unofficial hypothesis is that the lid cracked due to stress, natural settling, a displacement in the foundations, heat expansion, earthquakes, geology. Reasonable, rational, boring. But here is a problem. The granite used in the Serapeum is black from Aswan, incredibly resistant to cracks, and carved with tools that we have not yet identified. If the lid cracked due to tension, why only one? Why not all 24? Why only that box? And why does it seem to have cracked upwards? You don't have to believe in curses or monsters to find it suspicious. You just have to wonder what's inside that we've never found. Because remember, most of the Serapeum boxes are empty. No bonis, no bulls, no offerings. But some researchers, including some insiders, claim that one box was not empty. That during the first excavations in the 19th century, a sealed sarcophagus was opened. Inside, there was not a bull, but a larger than normal, deformed, humanoid skeleton, wrapped in linen and placed unnaturally, as if it had been bent to fit into the container. The history was silenced and the remains removed. There are no photos, no records, only a rumor that someone opened the wrong box and saw something they shouldn't have. They still can't explain it because you shouldn't ask. The Serapeum is closed for a reason, not for conservation, but for its containment. 24 perfectly sealed granite vaults were not built to leave them empty. Boxes that can survive an earthquake, a flood, or time itself are not carved, unless you want what is inside to never emerge. So what if they weren't tombs? What if they were cells? Containment units, vaults, not to honor the divine, but to lock it up. And if that's true, then the box with a cracked lid is not just a mystery. It's a leak, a pressure valve, a stress fracture in the wall between worlds. Or maybe it's worse than that. Maybe something woke up. Maybe something moved. Or maybe something inside was trying to get out. And that leads us to the real question. Why hasn't it been resealed? Unless it can't be. Unless what broke that lid did so with a type of force from which granite does not recover. And the people in charge of watching these things decided it was safer to leave it like that. No more punctures, no more perforations, just darkness, silence, and hope. Hope that the box does not open further. Hope that nothing else moves. Because if even one of those ancient vaults contained something more than stone, then the 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞 was not a tomb. It was a prison. And the question is not why they built these boxes, but who or what they were trying to keep inside during the 120 years of drought, the century that 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐿 forgot. If 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐿 was a miracle of geography, then the Nilo was the spell that made it work. Every year, like a divine clock, the river overflowed. It fed the crops, sculpted the fields, sustained the cities, and reminded everyone that the gods or the engineers still cared. But then, around 2200 A.C., something broke. The rivers stopped overflowing. The sky stopped raining. The scribes stopped writing. And 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐿 entered one of its darkest and most mysterious periods. A 120-year drought so severe that it ended the old empire and almost erased an empire. The name historians give it, the first intermediate period, a pretty and polite euphemism to refer to total collapse. That's how it happened. The old empire was the era of the pyramids of 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐿 from the 4th to the 6th dynasty. Khufu Khafre Manstone on stone legacy construction immortality as national infrastructure. But toward the end of the 6th dynasty, things began to fall apart. The central government weakened. The inscriptions on the tombs lost their grandeur. The monuments stopped being built. And then silence. For more than a century, 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐿 left no great inscriptions, no temples, no pyramids, nor royal records. It is as if the country had held its breath and fainted. As for the landscape, the situation was different. Small kings, local warlords, decentralized government, end of monument construction, end of the great cosmic order. The gods had fallen silent. The scientists tried to explain it. The climatologists point to global evidence of a major climate event. The data from tree rings, ice core samples, and sediment analysis shows a prolonged mega-drought around 2200 BC. See, not only in Egypt, but throughout the Middle East, Mesopotamia, China, and even in parts of Europe. They call it the 42-kilo-year event, a massive shift in climate patterns that collapsed civilizations. In Egypt, it meant the end of the Nile's flood cycle. For a society built entirely on that rhythm, the consequences were apocalyptic. Hunger, civil unrest, plagues, massive abandonment of cities. Ancient records, although scarce, give clues to the chaos. A text, the warnings of Epure, seems more like the script of a post-apocalyptic movie. Look, the river is blood, and one drinks it. The rich lament, and the poor rejoice. Everything is in ruins. Perhaps it is a hyperbole, but desperation does not exaggerate for fun. They still cannot explain it, because Egypt never directly recognized it. One would expect that a civilization obsessed with order and rituals would document such a catastrophe. But there are no great reliefs depicting the drought. There are no temples that represent the gods crying over a dry Nile. There are no reconciliation ceremonies. Only a hole in time, a forgotten century. And that raises a disturbing possibility. What if it wasn't just a drought? What if something else happened? Some researchers have observed strange discontinuities in the architectural evolution of Egypt during this period. The tools regressed. Art became coarser. Religious practices fractured. The center not only collapsed, it was erased as if it were designed. What kind of disaster makes a civilization not only fall apart, but stop remembering its own existence? Unless someone told them not to, or even worse, unless memory itself was the victim. And this is where the theory arises that the drought was only the superficial cause. That something else arose from below, from beyond, from within. That the temples were emptied, not by hunger, but by fear. That ritual knowledge was lost or sealed due to what it accidentally unleashed. Some even believe that the 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞, the well of Osiris, or the hidden gaps in the pyramid were sealed during this time. that they were emergency measures, not funerary projects, nor tombs, nor locks. And if that is the case, then the first intermediate period was not just a collapse. It was a quarantine, a way to pause a civilization that had gotten too close to something it shouldn't know. And when the drought finally ended, when the river returned, when the gods were invited back, Egypt restarted. New kings, new dynasties, the same monuments, a different meaning. And no one ever spoke again of the lost century. The temple of the millions of years, built for eternity, erased in silence. Ancient Egypt did nothing halfway. They did not build for decades. They built for dynasties. When they said forever, they meant the sandstone. They meant aligning it with the stars and engraving their names in the moonlight. So when a pharaoh built something and called it a temple of millions of years, it was expected to last. But one of those temples, mentioned in texts described in detail by explorers, has disappeared without trace. It has not been destroyed or buried, but simply erased. This is what happened. The expression, temple of millions of years, was not unique. It was used to describe the funerary temples of pharaohs. But this one in particular belonged to Amenhotep III, one of the greatest kings of Egypt. He ruled during the 18th dynasty, at the height of Egyptian imperial power, a golden age. This man built statues the size of skyscrapers. He erected temples that rivaled cities. His legacy was immense. The temple we are talking about was located on the western bank of Thebes, near the current city of Luxor. It was supposed to be more grandiose than Karnak, more elaborate than the Temple of Luxor, a monument not to death, but to divine royalty. Travelers of antiquity described it. It was mentioned by ancient Greek historians. Even Napoleon's surveyors drew the outline of its foundations. And now there is nothing left. The only thing left are two gigantic statues. The colossi of Memnon stand as lonely punctuation marks in an empty field. There is no temple, no ruins, just flat land and a strange feeling of absence. Scientists have tried to explain it. The official version is as follows. The temple of Amenhotep III was built too close to the floodplain. The Nile changed its course. The ground became unstable. Over the centuries, the foundations were undermined. The stone was reused, and the rest dissolved into mud and memories. Reasonable, boring, reassuring. Except that explanation does not quite fit. Other nearby temples built on similar terrain are still standing. There is no evidence that the temple was systematically dismantled. The colossi survived and were part of the same complex. No archaeologist has found a single intact wall, or one that definitely belongs to the temple. It is as if it had never existed, but it did exist. We have written records. We have measurements. We have plans. So where is it? They still cannot explain it, because the temple was not built only for worship. It was built for rituals. It was not just a memorial. It was a cosmic interface, a place to celebrate the mentioned festival, a rite of royal rejuvenation intended to renew the power of the pharaoh by symbolically killing him and being reborn as a god. Some scholars believe that the temple was designed with intentional impermanence, not because they expected it to collapse, but because it was destined to disappear. An ephemeral structure, a ritual construction, not architectural, a temple built not to last, but to fade. Others speculate on darker causes, such as that the temple was not dismantled, but erased, not by a flood, but by political order. The son of Amenhotep III was Akhenaten, the monotheistic rebel who tried to end the gods of Egypt and replace them with the solar disk. According to this vision, the temple of millions of years was destroyed as part of a spiritual coup. Its rituals were too powerful, its design too threatening, its symbolism linked to the ancient gods, an obstacle to monotheistic propaganda. So it was torn down piece by piece, erased from the stone, erased from memory. Except that it did not work because we remember the absence. And absence is the strongest presence of all. Here is another theory. Impossible to demonstrate, of course, which makes this perfect. What if the temple was never just physical? What if it was built with stone and with time? A structure destined to exist only under a specific alignment, built to appear, function, then disappear when the cycle ended. A calendar temple, a single-use machine, myth made temporarily real. That would explain its scale, its disappearance, and the intensity of the silence that surrounds it. Because if you build something to interact with eternity, you may not want it to remain there once the gods have finished using it. So the next time you pass by the Colosseum of Menon, two stone giants sitting awkwardly in an empty field, don't ask where the temple is. Ask what happened when it was there and why the desert was so eager to reclaim it. The impossible stone cuts of Abu Rash, forgotten tools, remembered scars. Abu Rash has nothing flashy about it. It does not appear on any postcards. It is not on the route of any tourist buses. It barely appears on the map, just some scattered ruins about 8 kilometers north of Giza. But if you walk through its forgotten slopes and run your hand over the exposed rock, you will feel it. The cuts are too smooth, too sharp, and too straight. It is not about mere natural erosion. It is not chisel work. It is one that the Egyptologists still cannot quite explain. And the worst thing is that nobody ever talks about it. This is what is known now. Abu Rash was once home to the pyramid of 𝐦𝐤𝐬, Khufu's son. Today it is mainly rubble, collapsed blocks, eroded rock, and the echoes of something that almost was. Most people believe that the pyramid was never finished. Or if it was dismantled, possibly by later rulers or by opportunistic stone thieves. But scattered around the site are pieces of granite, basalt, and very well-finished limestone. And they are not only carved well. They are machine-cut or look like perfectly flat surfaces, as if they had been polished with diamond tools. The holes are so uniform and deep that modern engineers used curves and recesses that required a rotary movement and mechanical consistency. It is not just about effort. It is about advanced technology. The type of cuts that should not exist in 2500 BC. And yet there they remain. Worn, silent, too clean to ignore, too precise to explain as simple stone masonry. Scientists have tried to explain it. Some conventional Egyptologists admit that these cuts are interesting. They suggest the use of abrasive copper saws, sand, water, and infinite labor. But that alone is not enough. The geologist Dr. Robert Schull and the engineer Christopher Dunn have analyzed similar cuts at other sites and found tool marks compatible with high-speed rotary machinery of the type found in a modern workshop, not in a Bronze Age quarry. Dunn, in particular, argues that many of these cuts show, suggesting the use of circular blades or tubular drills. And not just any drill, but some that exerted enormous pressure, much greater than soft copper tools could generate. It is not only just the presence of the cuts. It is the absence of any corresponding tools. This type of technology simply cannot be hidden. Either you had it or you didn't. So either the ancient Egyptians used tools that we have never found, or they inherited a method from an older civilization, or someone else was making the cuts. And when you're in the quarry of Abu Rash looking at a stone ditch that seems to have been machined last week, the third option does not seem so far-fetched. They still cannot explain it because the story is too fragile. Egyptology is based on a timeline that requires progress, not regression. If the oldest pyramids and temples show the greatest precision and the most recent ones seem less refined, then either Egypt forgot how to build or it imitated something older. Abu Rash looks like a scar, a vestige of tools that no one else had access to. And if those tools ever existed, where are they now? Have they disappeared, been buried, hidden, or are they simply not what we believe they were? And here comes the strangest question. Why was the pyramid of 𝐦𝐤𝐬 left unfinished? He was the legitimate son of Khufu. He built away from Giza, broke with tradition, and then disappeared from the list of kings. Some believe he was overthrown. Others say he died young. But maybe, just maybe, he was building something different, something he should not have built. What if Abu Rash was not abandoned because it failed, but because it worked too well? What if Jade's builders unearthed or rediscovered something ancient? A technique, a machine, a method. What if someone made sure it stayed buried? Because these cuts, these impossible and silent wounds in the stone, do not lie. They whisper of a lost technology, a forgotten knowledge, a history carved and then silenced. but the stone remembers, it always does. The pyramid that was never a tomb. The empty legacy of Khufu. There it is. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the last wonder of the ancient world that is still preserved. Almost 150 meters high when built. More than 2 million stone blocks aligned with true north with an accuracy of 1/50th of a degree. Is perfect, timeless, unwavering, and possibly completely misclassified. Because despite all the books, documentaries, and tourist brochures that call it the Tomb of Khufu, there is a small detail that keeps bothering us. There is no body. This is what happened. The official story is that the pyramid was built during the reign of the pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops, around 2580 A.B.C. It was his final resting place, a colossal monument to his power destined to outlive time. But when 𝐦𝐚𝐬, the 9th century caliph of Baghdad, dug a tunnel into the pyramid in search of treasure, he found no gold. He found no mummy. He found nothing. The king's chamber, the central cavity of the pyramid, was empty. All it contained was a granite box, open, without inscriptions, and undecorated. There was no sarcophagus, no lid, no body, no funerary trousseau, just an echo. Modern Egyptologists say that the pyramid was probably looted in antiquity, that the burial was disturbed, that the funerary objects were stripped, and the mummy destroyed. But here's the problem. There is no sign that a burial took place. There are no residues, no coffin fragments, no funerary plaster, no traces of organic material, no soot from torches, no blocks from the ceiling. Nothing. Not even a cartouche with the name of Khufu inside the pyramid. The only graffiti that relates Khufu to the Great Pyramid was found in a small upper chamber, written by workers, not priests. And even that has been accused of being a 19th century forgery, which means that the largest and most mathematically advanced structure in the history of mankind may never have housed a corpse. Scientists have tried to explain it. The looting theory is still the most accepted, but the details still don't add up. Why is the interior design so complex, with multiple chambers and strange conduits? If it was just a tomb, why build a large gallery the size of a cathedral that only leads to an empty box? Why are there no artworks inside? Not a single hieroglyph, not even a name. Other pyramids had artworks, coffins, inscriptions, rituals. The Great Pyramid, silence. Some Egyptologists have dared to suggest something obvious. Maybe it wasn't a tomb. Maybe it never was. They still can't explain it because everything in the pyramid points toward a different function. Its base is aligned with incredible precision to the cardinal points. Its dimensions codify pi and the golden ratio. The ducks point to specific stars: Orion, Sirius, Thuban. The king's chamber uses granite beams that weigh 50 tons, stacked in 5 layers, with a design more suitable for containing pressure than spiritual symbolism. Some researchers believe the pyramid was a resonant structure built to amplify sound, energy, or frequency. Others believe it was a stellar observatory or even an energy generator, part of a forgotten science of sacred geometry and planetary harmony. And some go further still. What if the pyramid was not built for the dead, but rather for the living? What if it were a chamber for initiation instead of burial? A place where the priest-kings of Egypt underwent a physical, spiritual, or other transformation. The Greeks believed that Egyptian mysteries could alter one's soul, that the initiates emerged transformed, enlightened, reborn, terrified. From this point of view, the pyramid isn't a tomb. It is a device, a machine to turn humans into gods. And if that sounds far-fetched, all the better. Because so is carving 23 million blocks of stone with Bronze Age tools, stacking them with millimeter precision, and aligning them with the stars just to bury a man in an empty box. Let's be honest. The Great Pyramid is too big to be a tomb. It is too empty to be a sanctuary. And it is too perfect to be merely a monument. It was not designed to be understood. It was designed to work. Only we have forgotten how. So maybe it's not a tomb. Maybe it's a key. And we have spent the last 4,500 years looking for its lock. The pyramidal problem. The lost tips of Egypt. You have seen it shape your whole life. A triangle at the top, a wide base rising to a point. The pyramid, the icon of immortality, divine order, architectural perfection. But here's the question. That tip, that brilliant final touch, is missing from almost all of them. Almost all the pyramids of Egypt, from the smallest to the Great Pyramid, are blunt, as if something had been stolen from them. They had been destroyed or they had never been placed. We call that missing piece a pyramidion. Its widespread absence isn't just aesthetic. It is suspicious. This is how it works. A pyramidion is the keystone, the final stone, usually shaped like a miniature pyramid, but polished, often gilded, sometimes with inscriptions, the literal and symbolic apex of the structure. In theory, the pyramidion was the last block placed, sealing the monument and symbolizing the pharaoh's connection with the sun god Ra. The pyramid itself represented a staircase toward heaven. The pyramidion, the spark of divinity at the top. They were described in ancient texts, represented in reliefs, and even ritualized. But here is the mystery. Of the more than 80 pyramids built in ancient Egypt, almost none have their pyramidion. The Great Pyramids has disappeared. Khafre's has disappeared. Menkaur's has disappeared. The Bent Pyramid has disappeared. The Red Pyramid has disappeared. Saqqara? No. Dahshur? No. Abu Rawash? Don't even ask. In fact, only a handful of pyramidions have been found, and they were not discovered on top of any. They were found buried, broken, or resting quietly in museums without much fanfare. Why? Scientists have tried to explain it. The most common explanation is erosion or theft. Being at the top and being very visible, the pyramidions were easy targets for looters, iconoclasts, or simply the passage of time. That makes sense for one, maybe a few. But for all of them, more than 4,000 years. No one bothered to preserve even a single original capstone in its place. It's not that Egypt forgot how to protect monuments. We have tombs full of toenail clippings that have survived 3,000 years, but not a single sacred capstone. That is not just erosion. That is elimination. They still can't explain it because there's no pattern. Some pyramids have religious inscriptions, and others are blank. Some are made of granite, others of basalt, and others of white limestone. Some are small, others are huge. None of them is in its original place. And the more you dig, the stranger it becomes. Because many ancient Egyptian texts describe the pyramids as coated in metal, often electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, polished to a dazzling shine. They were not just symbols, they were conductors. And if you believe fringe theories, get ready. Because the pyramidion was not just a decorative top. It was the central component of the pyramid as a device. Think about it. A giant limestone structure, stable, dense, geometrically aligned. A granite core, internal electrical conduits pointing to the celestial bodies. Underground chambers, possible water flows, acoustic properties. And at the top, a metal tip. It looks a lot like a circuit, doesn't it? A machine, or more specifically, a transmitter. Some researchers believe that the pyramidion functioned as the tip of an antenna that completed an energy structure designed to interact with the Earth's magnetic field, channel cosmic frequencies, or even generate energy. And if that is true, then removing the pyramidion would have been essential to deactivate it, disarm it, turn it off, and that could explain their total absence. It is not about random theft, but selective deactivation. Does it still seem too far-fetched to you? Then ask yourself this. If the pyramidions were so sacred, so divine, why do we not find temples dedicated to them? Why are the few remaining examples never prominently displayed? Why does the tip of Egypt's most iconic symbol receive so little attention? Unless someone doesn't want us looking up. Because the tip of a pyramid is not only aesthetic. It is symbolic, spiritual, and energetic. It represents the culmination, which means that all these missing pyramidions could be more than simple absent stones. They could be incomplete sentences, monuments that have lost meaning, devices that have lost their keys. And until we discover where they are or why they were subtracted, we may never really understand why pyramids were built. Because if something disappeared from each summit, perhaps what was lost is not just the tip. It is the sense. The myth of the inverted pyramid, the monument under our feet. It begins with a whisper, a casual phrase in a dusty chronicle, a footnote in a dark travel diary. There was a pyramid converted into earth. At first, we dismissed it. A metaphor, no doubt, a mistranslation, a poetic way to describe a burial pit or an underground tomb. But then it appears again and again. Different sources separated by centuries, all alluding to a pyramid that was not built upwards, but downwards. A monument that was not erected for the gods, but sank into the earth like a geometric scar. A negative space, a void of deliberate symmetry, an inverted pyramid. This is how it happens. The myth suggests that somewhere under Egypto, perhaps under Giza, perhaps in Saqqara, perhaps in some place lost between the quicksand, there is a pyramid excavated completely under the surface, not made of blocks but carved into the bedrock. A descending structure, shaped like a mirror of its sisters on the surface. Level after level, all angles preserved, but invisible from the sky. A pyramid that is not looked up at. A pyramid in which one falls. Some say it was built as an antithesis of the Great Pyramid, a structure of negation, a spiritual inverse. Others claim that it was a ritual tomb for something too dangerous or sacred to be buried in plain sight. And then there are the stories that say that the 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐤 did not build it, but found it, copied it, and then did everything possible to hide it. Scientists have tried to explain it. Most scholars flatly deny the inverted pyramid. There are no archaeological records, no cartridges, no diagrams in any known tomb or scroll. But this is where things get weird. In Saqqara, the step pyramid of Djoser is built on a huge pit almost 30 meters deep with interconnected tunnels and side chambers below. Many believe that these were storage galleries, but others point to the suspicious geometry of the underground corridors, which descend in straight lines, sharp angles, and deliberate symmetry. Even older structures, such as the Abydos, are located far below ground level, with huge granite blocks, water-filled chambers, and no clear origin. And then there are the unexplained voids under Giza, detected by seismic scanners and radars, which suggest the existence of large, unexplored underground structures with right-angled edges and symmetrical depth. Could they be remains or entrances? They still cannot explain it because the idea of inversion does not fit into the Egyptian architectural model. But the myth loves inversion. In ancient Egyptian cosmology, the world was born from nothing, from the watery abyss that lay beneath everything. The gods emerged from this void. Creation came from below, not from above. And some texts suggest that the dead did not only ascend to the stars. They descended to earth through mirrored worlds, through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. What better way to honor that journey than with a structure that reflects the pyramid upside down? An initiation chamber, perhaps, a labyrinth, a prison, or, worse still, a door. Because if the pyramids on Earth were tombs for kings, perhaps an underground pyramid was built for something that no one wanted to return from. Some researchers, often ignored, believe that ancient Egypto inherited its sacred geometry from an earlier civilization, that the very idea of the pyramid comes from something they found, buried, immense, and that was not theirs, an inverted structure shaped like a keyhole. Powerful, ancient, built not to celebrate death, but to contain it. And if that is true, then perhaps all the pyramids we see are decoys. Echoes, imitations of the one below. Because if you wanted to hide something in plain sight, what better distraction than dozens of monuments on Earth, each claiming to be the real one? And what if the real pyramid, the first, the oldest, the inverted one, still resonates under our feet, dug deep, flooded with sand, sealed by silence, waiting, the forgotten symbol, the ink that disappeared? You have seen it, a cross with a loop at the top, held by gods, grasped by pharaohs, engraved on tombs, temple walls, and amulets by the millions. The Ankh, the key of life of Egypt, a symbol so central in its spiritual language. It appeared in all periods, in all dynasties, in all representations of divine power, until one day it stopped appearing. It was not something gradual, nor was it replaced. It simply disappeared, The __, the definitive symbol of eternity, disappeared from the visual vocabulary of Egypt, and nobody really knows why. This is what is said. The __ was not only decorative, it was functional. The gods held it extended, pressing it against the lips of the kings to give them life. It adorned the coffins, promising rebirth. It hung in the temples. It was carried in the ceremonies. It was everywhere, from the sun gods to the funeral rites, from magic texts to kitchen knives. Its form was deliberate. The loop represented the eternal, the soul, the womb. The crossbar symbolized the horizon, the meeting of the earth and the sky. The vertical stem, the path between worlds. As a whole, the __ was not just a symbol. It was a map of life, of death, of return. And for thousands of years, it persisted unchanged until the end of the dynasties, until Rome, until Christianity, and then silence. The __ was abandoned. There were no longer carved hands that offered it. There was no longer art that placed it in the mouths of the dead. Even in Coptic Christianity, where the crux ansata, a cross with a loop, appears briefly, it is stripped of its original meaning. Only decoration, only heritage, without power. The scientists have tried to explain it. The typical answer, a religious transition. As Christianity spread through Egypt, the oldest symbols were demonized or deactivated. The temples were closed. The priesthood was dissolved. The icons were disfigured. The ancient gods were too pagan, too powerful, too inconvenient from a political point of view. So the __, like Horus, Osiris, and Thoth, was thrown into the junk drawer of cultural memory. But here's the problem. The __ not only stopped being used, it stopped being copied. There are no rudimentary versions in later popular art. It does not appear clandestinely in Coptic tombs, nor is it transformed into a Christian metaphor. It was not absorbed. It was eliminated, and that suggests an intention. They still cannot explain it, because if the __ was only a symbol, why was it treated as a threat? Other motifs survived. The eye of Horus became a protective jewel. The beetles were reused as good luck charms. Even hieroglyphs persisted in some talismans. But the __ the symbol of life, was treated as a closed door, leading to a very different theory. What if the __ was not only a symbol of life, but also a technology of it? Some esoteric researchers believe that the __ was not only a spiritual tool, but a functional object, a kind of vibratory key, an object used in rituals to alter consciousness, restore balance, or even transmit energy. There are representations of the __ being used in healing rituals, astral travels, and resurrection rites. It appears again and again in the hands of God, standing before doors, as if the __ was necessary to open something. And if that is true, what happens when it falls into wrong hands? Perhaps the __ was buried because it was no longer safe. Perhaps it was encoded in stone, so only those with the proper initiation could unlock its true meaning. Or perhaps the __ was not only a key. Perhaps it was a lock, a safeguard, a glyph of balance that retained something. Egypt was always trying to control chaos, death, or something more ancient. So when the priests fell, when the temples collapsed, when the rituals ended, the __ was not transmitted. It was sealed, and we copied the form, but we lost its function. We wear it, we tattoo it, we mass-produce it in gold and plastic, but we don't know what it is for. Because symbols are not only images, they're systems. And when you break the system, you lose power. And perhaps that is what happened to the __ It was not destroyed, nor erased, only turned off waiting. The pyramid that floated, the missing tomb of Egypt on the water. Not all pyramids touch the earth. At least, not according to the Greeks. In one of the strangest accounts about Egypt that has been recorded, the ancient historian 𝐥𝐤 describes a floating tomb, a structure that defied gravity, architecture, and common sense. He was not being metaphorical. He was not dreaming. He was describing a pyramid in a lake that seemed to float on the surface. And then, as mysteriously as it appeared, it disappeared from history. Without ruins, without plans, without engravings, only a description and a question. What was the tomb that floated? How did it happen? The account of 𝐥𝐤 takes us to Lake Moeris, a huge, partially artificial lake in the oasis of Fayum in Egypt. He wrote that within this lake stood 2 pyramids, or perhaps only the tops of 2 pyramids, with their bases submerged under the water. He claimed that during certain times of year, only the tips were seen. The rest lay beneath the surface like sleeping titans. But even stranger, he claimed that the central structure of the tomb seemed to float, drifting slightly and shining on surface. Other writers such as Pliny the Elder, Diodorus Siculus, and Herodotus also made reference to strange constructions near or inside the lake. Temples, tombs, and altars dedicated to the gods of water and rebirth. Some said that they were symbolic islands, artificial constructions destined to represent the afterlife. But a floating pyramid is something else. Scientists have tried to explain it. Modern Egyptologists assume that the stories were exaggerated. Perhaps the pyramids were only hills misidentified by travelers who did not know Egyptian terrain. Or perhaps they were real pyramids built near the lake, whose floods made them appear partially submerged. But here comes something strange. Pyramids of this type have never been found. Lake Moeris, now known as Birket Karun, has been studied thoroughly. There are no foundations of pyramids, no submerged ruins, no trace of anything that 𝐥𝐤 described. And that is what makes the story seem less like an exaggeration and more like a deliberate redaction. They still cannot explain it, because Lake Moeris is more than just a lake. It is a hydraulic marvel, partly artificial, fed by ancient canals and basins designed with astonishing precision. The lake functioned as a reservoir, a flood control system, and possibly something else. It was sacred to 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞, the crocodile god, a deity of water, chaos, and protection. It was the site of mysterious temples, like the labyrinth of Hara, and its water levels were manipulated by ancient engineers whose methods we have not yet fully deciphered. So what if the lake itself was a ritual device? 𝐸𝐴𝐵𝐸, 𝐸𝐴𝐴𝐵𝐸, 𝐸𝐵𝐸. What if during certain times of year, equinoxes, solstices, celestial alignments, something appeared in that mirror? Perhaps not a literal floating pyramid, but a reflection, a flash of stone that was not there before. An architectural mirage, a stargate, a structure destined to exist only under specific conditions. Or maybe, just maybe, the stories were true. Maybe there was a tomb built on the water, whose foundations were not of limestone, but intention. A structure so sacred that it could not be touched by earth. So sacred that it had to float. Some legends say that the tomb belonged to a priest-king, a divine architect who guarded the secrets of earth and sky. Others claim that it was an initiation platform where the highest initiates crossed from life to death without ever sinking. And if that seems impossible to you, think about this. The Egyptians built boats for the dead, solar boats, funerary boats. They buried entire fleets beside their pyramids. For them, the soul traveled on the water. So maybe the floating pyramid was not just a metaphor. Maybe it was a ferry for the spirit, for the gods, for the impossible. And if it disappeared, it was not because it was destroyed. It was because it was never meant to stay. It appeared. It worked. And then, like a completed ritual, it returned to the water, leaving behind only whispers, only the flash of memory, only the sensation that something beyond reflection once touched the edge of reality and then faded.